So we're going to do that this morning. We're going to kind of look at the history of what Adventists have done in the past during times like this, and just see what God says in His Word and really reason together to see what we're supposed to be doing as Adventists at this time.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think it is really important. I think there's a lot of people that don't really understand our history. And in not understanding our history, I think that causes a lot of confusion, especially in a time like this. What should we be doing as a church, right? What does it mean to be relevant in a society in the midst of different things that may be going on socially? How are we supposed to respond? And I know, just being a public figure, I get emails all the time, Facebook messages all the time, and
All the time.
I'm seeing all kinds of responses like, this is what we need to be doing. No, we shouldn't be doing this at all. And it's just all over the map. So I think having a really good understanding of our foundation is crucial for us to know how we should move forward.
That's right.
And that's what we're going to hit today. So.
That's right. I know that I've personally have heard things that say we should not be talking about these things. Maybe just praying, but not talking about these things publicly and getting involved in things that are going on. I've heard things like you're being divisive. I've heard things like this is political. So some people believe and think this way. So we want to actually go back in history, like we said, and we want to welcome our guests. We want to welcome Benjamin and Kevin. Are you there? Can you hear us? Welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. And we want you to take us back in history. We want to help us to travel back to maybe 1863 time, and the Adventist Church was just officially forming an official church. What was the state of mind, and what was their involvement in things like we're dealing with right now with race relations in America? Either one of you can take that one.
Well, can we go back a little further than that and get
let's
to
go
sort
back
of the
even
very
further.
beginning?
Yes, let's go back.
Okay, so I'll start off by talking about the Millerite movement. And something I don't remember if I shared this with Light Bearers or elsewhere, but I'll lead off by saying that I'm convinced now in my research that the Seventh-day Adventist Church would not have existed without the abolitionist movement. That's how closely intertwined they were with one another. And that is true from the moment, almost from the very moment that William Miller starts preaching that Christ is going to return about the year 1843. He starts to preach in 1831, the same year that white people for the first time are really going to start to coalesce around William Lloyd Garrison and launch the abolitionist movement. And so black protests had been strong before that, but finally it took someone like Garrison to wake up and to amplify their voice and to echo black protests for people. And so that starts on January 1, 1831, in memory of the Haitian Revolution that happened earlier, the only successful slave revolt in history. And Miller starts to preach a few months later, and then he publishes for the first time in 1832. And within a few months of that, starting to publish in May 1832, he becomes an abolitionist. And so he starts to incorporate really black protest arguments into his apocalyptic system. And so he makes it very clear throughout his career that if you hold pro-slavery sympathies, you were going to be damned in the judgment. And so that was a form of moral suasion to try to persuade you that you need to change your ways so that you will be right with God when he comes and the judgment takes place. He also adds an argument to his system, which I think is very rarely ever stated. I've only ever seen it stated by black abolitionists like Maria W. Stewart. And Miller argues that just like in Egypt, God sent 10 plagues upon the Egyptians because they were slaveholders. And William Miller says, God has 7 last plagues described in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, and those are going to be poured out on slaveholding Babylon as well. And so William Miller makes and understands the plagues in Egypt, the 10 plagues of Egypt, to be this sort of type that will have their fulfillment in an anti-type in his own day, his own era. And so beginning with that, everything just gets wrapped up with abolitionism very, very quickly.
Hey, can I pause you for a second? So
Please.
Just to clarify, William Miller was equating Babylon with the connection of slavery.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And he, at this point in 1830, the 1833, 34, 35, when he's making this argument for the first time, he is basically broadening out a concept. Before his time, most Protestants in America were not willing to admit that Protestants could be part of Babylon. Okay? The Catholic Church was Babylon. That was clear to them. That was it. But what William Miller is doing is he's saying that people who are participating in the slavery system, even if they're Protestant, they are also Babylon. Later on in the Millerite movement, by the time you get to like the early 1840s for sure, the majority of Millerites will start to say it's not just people who are supporting slavery by actually holding slaves, but anyone and everyone in these Protestant churches who is not willing to come out and completely disassociate themselves with slaveholding, they are Babylon too.
Wow.
And so it gets to the point where because almost all evangelicals, North and South, are supporting slavery at this time.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about almost all of them. And so Millerites say, we've got to come out of Babylon. How do we know that the Protestant churches are Babylon? Because they support slavery. People who hold slaves or who are pro-slavery, they will go in and they will commune at the same communion table with you. And maybe they'll even be the minister and minister at the altar of God. And so they say, we cannot associate with that whatsoever. They also say, because of the fact that they reject the Advent doctrine, we've got to come out for that reason too. But those are the two main reasons that they do. And we usually in history only talk about the one. They come out because they reject the Advent. It's not true. They come out because of slavery and the Advent.
Wow.
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 So that was the mindset of the Millerite movement.
Definitely. And it grows stronger and stronger throughout the 1840s. And you can see, like, I mean, I won't go into too many details because perhaps it's too much, but I mean, we
please
can talk
do.
about.
I think people are tuning in because they need you to go into this much detail. It's needed.
Okay.
So please do.
All right. Well, one of the things I found out is that an organization central to the rise of the Millerite movement was the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society. So one of the first ministers who accepts William Miller's theory was Henry Jones. He was a Congregationalist minister. He was not an abolitionist at the time. He was a temperance advocate and an anti-Mason, and I could go into details about that as well, but those are big reform movements in that era. And he comes into contact with Miller by reading his first articles, which were published in a paper called the Vermont Telegraph, directly next to an article on the immediate abolition of slavery. And so William Miller and abolition are linked as separate entities, and they're brought together on a sheet of a newspaper. And Henry Jones reads that newspaper, and he becomes convinced that William Miller is right, and he becomes convinced that this other author named Orson Murray was also right. And he converts to both Millerism and abolitionism. And he, along with Orson Murray starts to dialogue a lot with William Miller too. He's deeply affected. They are the main two men who are preaching in the state of Vermont and gathering and rallying up the cause. I mean, we're talking about just a couple of hundred abolitionists at this point.
Yeah.
In 1831, there are only 50 white people who are willing to actually subscribe to Garrison's Liberator. Almost everyone who's subscribed to that paper are black.
Wow.
And so there's a few white people in Vermont who are saying, we're going to do it. And so Henry Jones and Orson Murray, they start preaching around, traveling around Vermont, and they start to help organize anti-slavery societies throughout. And they've got 6 or 8 of them by the time May 1, 1834 comes around. And so Henry Jones and Orson Murray, they are the primary movers and shakers that form and organize the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society. And Henry Jones is a thorough Millerite. And Orson Murray at this time is in heavy dialogue with Miller, sleeping in his home, talking about the apocalypse. Miller goes to Orson Murray's home and sleeping in his home, and they're talking about the apocalypse, having Bible studies, etc. And then William Miller's first publisher, his name was Warham Walker, who publishes his stuff in the Vermont Telegraph that I mentioned. He also had not been an abolitionist, but he converts to both Millerism and abolitionism, and he's also one of the founding members of the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society. Wow. I started tracing this Vermont Anti-Slavery Society, and they've got 100 members maybe. At least 20 or more, I know for a fact, were Millerites. So we're talking about 20% at minimum of the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society are members of that society, and they're Millerites. And so this is huge. And so you see, from this moment on, I can say that this is also an interesting fact. Every single one of William Miller's publishers was an abolitionist.
Wow.
Every single one of them.
Wow.
Because the second publisher was Isaac Westcott. Isaac Westcott publishes his first full book. He was also a founding member of the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society. And so thoroughly entrenched were these ideas that William Miller's very first critics were also members of the Vermont Anti-Slavery Society. And that's important because critics are going to only spend the time critiquing an idea if it's close enough to feel threatening. And so this is the point. And so what I mean here is that from the very get-go, William Miller is such a thorough radical abolitionist that William Miller Garrison in 1840 will embrace him, tell his readers that he is a thorough abolitionist. He's also proud of him as a temperance advocate, also proud of him for being a non-resistant pacifist. And so Garrison will promote William Miller in 1840. He tells everyone in Boston, he's coming to speak here at this church. Come hear him at the Marlborough Chapel. And Joshua Himes, he arises on the scene in late 1839, and he becomes sort of the architect of Millerism, and he's the first to publish papers, all this kind of stuff. He will convince Garrison to advertise the Signs of the Times in the Liberator for a full month. And so you are gathering more people through this kind of a process who are going to join the Millerite movement as with an abolitionist background. Another interesting factor here is that the very first publishing association that publishes the Garrison's The Liberator, which in essence launches the abolitionist movement, they change ownership and they change name, but that exact same organization, that exact same business is the same one that launches the Millerite movement because they are the publishers of the Signs of the Times. They tell Joshua Himes, we will publish this if you will agree to edit it for free. And they do. And so the headquarters of the Millerite movement are literally an abolitionist headquarters as well. It's a printing shop that does many publications for abolitionist things, for Garrison, for other people. And so if you're going to walk into the Second Advent Depot in Boston, you're walking into an abolitionist space. They're shared, one and the same. And so like I could go on and on about these kinds of things, but the point is this: you cannot separate Millerism, Adventism from the abolitionist movement. They are thoroughly intertwined.
Okay, so I'm seeing so many comments coming up. People are just like amazed, and they're just excited to be able to hear this history, because this is history that, I mean, I was raised Adventist, and I went to all of our Adventist schools, and I even took, I went to Pine Forge Academy, and I took African American history as it pertains to the Adventist Church. But even in that history class, I didn't learn all of this, what you're beginning to share with us. And so we can see very clearly that within the Millerite movement that they were very involved in the racial issues at that time, which were obviously slavery. And so as we're moving forward and the Adventist Church is beginning to be formed, take us a little bit closer. And I don't know if Benjamin wants to pick up on this at this point, even though I want to come back to you too, Kevin. But Benjamin, do you want to pick up there for us?
Benjamin, before you jump in, I want to just ask a question of both of you, and maybe Benjamin might want to take a stab at this first. But was there opposition, especially within the Christian realm, to what Miller and these others were doing? That's my question. So let's talk about that. Go ahead, Benjamin. You can pick up, and then we'll see where it goes.
Well, since I see Kevin's excited, he can take that one. But I would like to speak. I would like to say a word on Black Millerites, because we've been discovering more Black Millerites, and there were a greater number of Blacks who embraced that movement than we heretofore thought. And interestingly, and this is something that Doug Morgan, Samuel London, and other Adventist historians have picked up on and they've been exploring. And that is, what is it about Adventism? And for that matter, what is it about Millerism that attracted Blacks who were active in social justice? What is it about Millerism? What is it about Adventism that has always attracted Blacks who are interested and who are social justice activists? When we look at Adventism, we know that some of the greatest civil rights figures were at one time associated with Adventism.
Like Sojourner Truth?
Sojourner Truth with Millerism. Of course, with Adventism, we have people like Mary Britton, Arna Bontemps of the Harlem Renaissance, Malcolm X was at one time a Seventh-day Adventist, and of course his mother, she was a magnificent civil rights activist within her own right. We have T.R.M. Howard, William Patterson, some of the Tuskegee Airmen were Seventh-day Adventists. We have Frederick Douglass's daughter, Rosetta Douglass Sprague, was a Seventh-day Adventist. Holds true for the Millerite movement as well. Atante mentioned Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth attended Millerite camp meetings, and she spoke at Millerite camp meetings. And she was counted among the Millerites. There is some confusion on that because after 1844, there was a great embarrassment with Millerism, obviously, because Jesus did not come. And so people mocked Millerite. I mean, they were a byword. And so when Sojourner Truth published her first biography, she wanted to somewhat distance herself from a movement that didn't pan out.
Right.
But she still has a rather lengthy chapter for that book on what is it, among the Adventists, I think among the Second Adventists. And so she talks extensively about her time with the Millerites, and her biographer, Nell Irvin Painter, points out that it was among the Adventists, and that's what they were called. The Millerites were called Adventists and Millerites. But she says it was among the Second Adventists that Sojourner Truth found her calling in life. It was where she became actualized.
Yeah.
Well, the Adventists, I mean, she was already a Christian preacher. She was already a Christian preacher. And when you look at the experience of Blacks, whether free or slaves, in the 1830s and 40s, they were already apocalyptic. Blacks had a built-in apocalypticism or a built-in eschatology, a built-in kind of a last day thinking. We recall Frederick Douglass in the Leonid meteor shower of 1833, when the stars fell. Frederick Douglass was enslaved, but he still said, I took this as an omen of the coming of Jesus.
Wow.
When the stars fell, and he said, I welcomed him as my savior, and Blacks saw the second coming of Jesus as a remediation, as a correction of the failed American political system. In other words, the American promise that all men are created equal and guaranteed, these rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, what have you, that has failed Blacks. And they're seeing all of, there's this movement that is arising to give them freedom. But, in the 1830s and 40s, that's still a long way off.
Yeah.
So even that movement is failing. So Jesus will stop it. Jesus will end this dark period of captivity, and suppression. And so even in 1833, Frederick Douglass realized that when he was enslaved, of course, Nat Turner and his rebellion, it was steeped in apocalypticism.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
You know, he almost seemed to think of his rebellion as the last days, as
the beginning of the apocalypse.
That would bring on the apocalypse. And this was rife later in Seventh-day Adventist thinking. When you read Ellen White's comments on the Civil War, it's almost like she's saying that the Civil War would end in the second coming of Jesus.
Wow.
You should read some of her statements. She almost thought like this is it. Probably like some of us think that COVID and some of the current race wars will usher in the second coming. But that is rife in early Adventist literature that that racial issues will usher in the parousia, the second coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
In Millerism, we have more black activists. Besides Sojourner Truth, we have William Still, the so-called forefather, the father of the Underground Railroad. Still was a Millerite. Even after 1844, of course, we know that Millerism, that Adventism continued after 1844, and I'm not talking about Sabbatarian Adventism. I'm not talking about what became the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm saying Millerism continued on in many forms. Of course, Joshua Himes. How many periodicals did he keep going, Kev? Probably 2.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and so William Still, the father of the Underground Railroad, he remained an Adventist, a Millerite, for the rest of his life. And he was donating to Millerite causes. And he says very clearly, listen to this. He says very clearly that the belief in the near advent, the soon advent of Jesus, has informed my work with the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
It has powered my work with the Underground Railroad. Now, many Adventists, even today, Seventh-day Adventists, act like we can't chew gum and walk at the same time. It's a very extremely disingenuous argument because they say, well, we can't do both. We can't witness for Jesus, give our message and be involved in, anti-black racism, overthrowing anti-black racism at the same time. And many people who are saying this aren't even witnessing. I mean, they're not witnessing much for the Advent. I mean, let's be honest. It's sort of like an armchair, they're keyboard warriors. They're in front of their computers, making these comments. So they're not doing either. They're not witnessing for the Adventist faith or doing racial activism. They're not doing either. But Adventists have always been able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we have some prominent black Millerite ministers like John W. Lewis and William Watkins, of course, William Still, and others who were Millerite ministers. They were Millerite ministers, and they were activists. They were social justice activists at the same time.
Wow.
Oftentimes, they would have Millerite periodicals, Millerite literature, and Garrison's Liberator.
Wow.
Abolitionist anti-slavery literature at the same time. They're passing out both. And so these things are intertwined. They're indissoluble. And the blacks and Millerites, one thing that you need to understand about blacks and Millerites is that blacks were not just Millerites. They created Millerism along with others. We have a black Millerite prophet named William Ford. Black Millerite leaders, like I just mentioned, John W. Lewis, and William Still. So they were, and they donated funds to the cause, expanded the racial parameters of the cause. So they were a part of the warp and woof of Millerism, and they created Millerism. One other thing we need to realize is that at times, and this is rather rare, I don't know if you use the term rare, but at times Millerism did penetrate the South. Millerites were largely persona non grata in the South because they were anti-slavery and abolitionist, and because already there was a gulf forming between sort of the northern mindset, the northern culture, and the southern mindset and culture. But when Millerism did enter the South, whether through publication, whether through Millerite preachers, there were Black enslaved Millerites who preached. And interestingly, the Millerite message always equated to a proclamation of freedom. So Black slaves always embraced it as a message of liberation. There were a couple of instances in which, I think it was Louisville, Kentucky, the one I'm thinking of, when Millerism was preached and a white slave owner heard the message and emancipated his Black slaves.
Wow.
And so it's almost like you hear the Millerite message and you immediately, you do the most woke thing you can do for the time.
Benjamin.
You free your slaves.
Yeah. I'm gonna put this question to you, and I know I already have a question on the table, but
For Kevin, but you're gonna go back to Benjamin. Okay.
no, for both of you.
Okay, for both. Go ahead.
So I have often equated the Adventist movement with Moses going into Egypt to deliver the children of Israel out of bondage. They had gone through 400 years of captivity. And in a prophetic sense, I look at that 1,260 years of Babylon dominion, after which God brings a man on the scene who, like Moses, is like, I can't talk, right? Don't send me, I can't. And this movement rises that is based upon setting people free out of Babylon, right? Come out of Babylon. And the fact that you guys are saying that that movement was not, because here's the thing, as Adventists, as you stated, we have typically only attributed false doctrine, right? Come out of the false teaching, and we have, to a large degree, just totally forgot about or have been unaware of the fact that this was also literally setting a people free. So my question to you is, what is the significance of God bringing this movement on the scene at the exact time that he's about to move to free slaves? Is there a corresponding, do you think there's a connection with, what other churches were the slaves going to go to? If, as you said,
Got you.
both the North and the South, Christianity, they're all supporting slavery. Where are these slaves going to go once they get their freedom?
They have a few options. Since at least around the time of the Revolution, that's when you start to see the rise of Black churches.
Yeah.
Right.
That split from white churches because of racist things, racist practices, virulent racist practices. And so there's like the AME Zion. There's these kinds of churches that are there. They are the ones who are going to do the best on Black-white race issues, of course, at this time. There's no question there.
Right.
But Millerites were not the only group to come out of Babylon because of slavery. You can read the book by John R. McKivigan called The War Against Pro-Slavery Religion, and he identified 6 groups that he calls come-outer sects. And so every single Protestant denomination split during the war.
Wow.
The only religion in America that didn't was the Catholic Church, because they had a very hierarchical structure, not because they didn't have issues with slavery. They very much mostly supported slavery, North and South.
Mercy.
But the Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, even the Quakers, who were much better than most, they all split. They all split on these issues. And so when you add up all of the numbers together of all of these so-called come-outer sects, and you include the one that McKivigan overlooked, which is Millerism, you probably have in the neighborhood of like maybe 50,000 people in the North. So that's a small group. And so you had a few options, but the way I will sort of answer your question is this. I really don't think that there was a better option than Seventh-day Adventism at the time when it came to the issues of race. You really couldn't do better. If you didn't believe in the Seventh-day Sabbath, then maybe you would go off and join the Wesleyan Methodists or something like that. If you were like super into what the Quakers did, maybe you would join the radical Quakers who were totally against slavery. But nevertheless, Adventists had a really appealing message to blacks. And Ben can share on this as well as me, but one of the things that's really important to point out too is one of the things that Adventists do from the very beginning. They actually borrow this from Seventh-day Baptists, who many of them, by the way, were also abolitionists. Almost everyone in America, North and South, is saying that Africa is a land of darkness. It's a place of heathenism, no Christianity, all this kind of stuff. It's a dark, dark land. And of course, the metaphor there is stark because they're applying it to human bodies as well as religion. But Seventh-day Adventists, following the lead of Seventh-day Baptists, they say, no, Africa is a land of light because they kept the Sabbath throughout the Middle Ages when everyone else was acquiescing to what the Pope said. And one of my favorite sermons of all time is E. Cleveland's sermon, That Stubborn Day. And if you haven't seen that sermon, it's on YouTube, and you gotta watch that sermon because Cleveland lays it down. He says, "What are you black people doing keeping Sunday? It's a white day."
Yes.
And I love that. And it's just like, man, he gets it. Like no Adventists were making it that explicit at that time, but they had all the fabric and material to do that. And you see that happening. And so these are some of the reasons. It's not just the fact that we are abolitionists, but well, actually, it probably is, because this is something that abolitionists would do. They would say, yeah, let's actually defend Africa. And so that's huge. I mean, those kinds of things help make Adventism really attractive to blacks.
All right, here's my question for you, and maybe it's a question you can't answer. Were they doing this out of a sense of guilt, or were they doing this out of a sense of this is the gospel? I mean, what do you think? Maybe we can't read hearts, obviously, but I don't know.
And I'm just going to add this little bit in there, because understanding the time, like it's not like now where you could actually get involved in a movement and you're not risking your life or maybe your job or even your wealth or whatever. But at that time, they were literally risking their lives. So I don't know.
If I could put a word on that, and this is a very minuscule response to a fairly broad question. Ellen White in the 1890s speaks of what you may call gospel reparations. And this is just one of a myriad of quotes that she makes about repaying blacks for slavery. And a lot of Adventists today may share Ellen White quotes that seem to be derogatory about blacks. But Ellen White is very clear when she says that if the blacks are degraded in character, it's because whites made them that way. It's because they were enslaved. And so that's a very interpretive lens. That's a very important lens of interpretation. But Ellen White's idea of gospel reparations, Adventism at the time was still a very, very tiny movement. They didn't have any political power to speak of. There wasn't much money. And so she said, we need to do all in our power to repay the blacks for the great sin that whites committed toward them. And interestingly, she always included Adventists and Northerners in the great sin of slavery. She never differentiated, even though ostensibly no Adventists ever had slaves. They made that claim several times, that nobody who holds the present truth possesses slaves.
Yeah.
But even though they never literally had slaves, she always groups and lumps Adventists,
Wow.
white Adventists, as the guilty party.
Wow.
And we would do well to think about it, because she says ad nauseum about how the Northerners they weren't just as culpable in slavery as Southerners, but they were culpable. They were profiting from it. They were fueling it. And so she said that during the Civil War, God is repaying the North and the South. And she seems to say, well, she does say that God protracted the war, so that there will be more casualties, because he was wreaking his judgment. And interestingly, he's retributing the guilty parties through other human beings. We still to this day, we think that God's vengeance, his retribution, is something that only he administers. But he was administering his retribution through soldiers and through circumstances. Very interesting. I'm speaking to Adventists here. Very interesting. The retribution of God is not some, thunderbolt that comes from heaven. It is done through humans. But anyhow, so Adventists in the 1890s didn't have much to speak of. So she said, let's repay blacks back for slavery by giving them the gospel.
Amen.
She says, when the church sort of bulked up their educational arm, she said, let's pay blacks back for slavery by going down south and educating and starting schools.
Oakwood.
Yeah, and a lot of feeder schools in Mississippi and other places. Let's pay blacks back by offering them medical care. And then they started an entire movement of help me out, Kevin, I can't believe I can't remember this.
Self-supporting?
No,
self-supporting?
No, it wasn't self-supporting. The little boxes that they had that you put your extra pennies in.
Oh, systematic benevolence.
No. For some reason, I can't think of it. Something boxes. I'm not sure why I can't think of it. Yeah. But then they started giving money to the quote unquote Southern cause, and the monies were misappropriated.
Wow.
And diverted to other places. Ellen White speaks extensively, and she had visions about this.
Wow.
Visions from God. And she said, it is racist, it is prejudiced, it is discriminatory that you have funneled the monies, particularly for the needy blacks in the South, for evangelism among whites.
Wow.
And so my point is this. Her idea of reparations to blacks was broad. But for those who couldn't do anything else, she considered teaching literacy, other skills, healthcare, and preaching the gospel as a type of reparation for what Adventists did by enslaving blacks.
I want to say something right here. There's a comment here that it's something that we actually talked about last night when we were discussing this program that was going to come on. Like, one of the comments was, we should be teaching our youth and our young people this history, because this is exciting. This is something that somebody else said, I'm so proud of my church. Like, they just didn't know this history, but hearing this history that you've shared just so far has made them even more proud of their church, to hear that they were so involved in these issues at that time. And if our young people understood that this is really who we are, or who we're supposed to be, as we can see, young people get involved in movements, the current things that are going on. You go out there, there's young people, like high schoolers. I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and there was high schoolers who put on this whole social justice rally locally. And there was like almost 3,000 people there. And they had never done anything like that before. But when young people grab hold of something and are passionate and believe this is something worth fighting for, and they can see that the history of their church, the forefathers of their church were actually doing this same type of thing. I mean, this is what is not shared, and I think it needs to be shared, and I think the enemy has a plan of why this is not shared as often as it should be. So I'm still so excited about this program.
Yeah.
Because it's bringing light.
Can you guys speak to, we're in a different place now than we were at the beginning of our church, right? We are not where we were. I'm talking about the spirit, the whole mentality. So how did that happen?
The abolitionist mentality?
Yeah.
Okay,
In other
gotcha.
words, where do we get to the place where we started separating the gospel from, being connected with the community, fighting for cause? Like, how did we get to the place? And I don't know if you have an answer for this. I'm just throwing it out there, where now we're like, hey, we shouldn't be doing that. We should be focusing on the gospel.
I think it's a very complex question, but an extremely important question. One that I get asked a lot. I think Ben gets asked it a lot too. And one that I ultimately want to really thoroughly explore. But I'll give you my shortish answer. It'll be a little bit extended, but Ben may want to chime in and say something to add to that or even critique it. I don't know, but go ahead, Ben. But I think it's very clear from multiple sources that Seventh-day Adventists were thoroughly abolitionists, and that means that they're not just wanting to abolish slavery, but they're also advocating for equal rights. And we could talk about how they're doing that and et cetera in a variety of ways. But that is very clear that we do start there. And yes, when you look at 20th century Adventism, it is different. That is not the way it was going down.
Yeah.
And so I think the first part of that shift happens the moment Seventh-day Adventists go down to the South. Okay, and so I start to see this whenever we open up our first mission in Texas in 1878. We send a couple of radical abolitionists named Joseph and Sarah Clark down there, and the Clarks are adamant that they are not going to segregate or bow down to what they call the great goddess caste. However, the situation is so violent down there. The KKK is active. Death threats start to be lobbied at Adventists, etc. Seventh-day Adventist leaders apparently started to butt heads with one another. So the Clarks, who are not wanting to bow down to segregation and racism, etc. R.M. Kilgore is saying, hey, we basically need to go ahead and do this because of safety. Apparently, even the black people they're ministering to are saying, yes, let's just segregate to save our skin, literally, type of thing. And so the Clarks are refusing to do that, and they end up leaving after 16 months. And Joseph Clark was convinced that whenever white Adventists from the North went down to the South, he says they, quote, get tinctured by Southern deference, privilege, and they think they're gentlemen, gentlemanly, womanly, whatever, and like really respectable. And then they start to see things through the lens of former slave owners.
Wow.
And so they leave the South and they go, well, actually, they don't leave it entirely. They go to Missouri and they open up a mission there. But they leave the mission that they started to the freed people in Texas. And you start to see segregation arise in the Seventh-day Adventist Church at this time in the South. It will eventually creep up north. And that will take time and decades. But to get to some of the shift, I think we see it clearer in the 1880s, especially 1890s, and especially the early 20th century, where you start to see these ideas getting brought in more and more. And in a nutshell, I'll say it this way. Seventh-day Adventists were intentional about, quote unquote, coming out of Babylon. Babylon meant the Protestant evangelical churches because they were supportive of slavery.
So there was no such thing as an Adventist evangelical?
I don't think there should be. I don't think
I'm
Adventists should
saying,
identify as
no,
evangelical.
I'm just saying there
There
was
was
no
not.
such thing as an Adventist evangelical.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's because of how I define evangelical. I don't think you can simply define it theologically. I think you also have to consider social
Yeah.
and political aspects to
Yeah.
that. And so when you do that, evangelicals from the very beginning have always been socially and politically conservative. And the abolitionist movement shows that and illustrates that. So Seventh-day Adventists, they came out of Babylon. They came out of evangelical churches. But they start to get closer and closer and closer throughout the 1800s and especially the 20th century, and they start wanting to become evangelicals again. And that's because of the world that's changing. Evangelicals change, Adventists change. And so, for example, whereas Adventists had disagreed theologically on the Advent doctrine, the eschatology, okay? Adventists said Christ is coming before 1,000 years of peace, a premillennialism. Evangelicals were saying, no, it's postmillennialism. Christ is coming after a millennium of peace. And so there was a disagreement there. But in the 1870s, a doctrine called premillennial dispensationalism started to catch on like wildfire among evangelicals. And so they come in closer and closer to Adventists. They disagree over the fine points, but nevertheless, they agree in some of the basic parameters now where they had not before.
Yeah.
Along these lines, you also have, after the Civil War, the threat of evolution and other sort of modernist theologies and doctrines that are going to creep in, and liberalism or whatever is going to arise. And so Adventists are unwilling to throw the Bible out. And I'm thankful for that, actually. But in this process, they start to come closer and closer to evangelicals.
Because they are now looking at a united enemy.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And the problem is whenever you see Adventists getting closer and closer with evangelicals, Adventists are more and more willing to accept those social and political conservativeness that evangelicals had, and they don't fight against it actively enough. And so let me give you the clearest example of that I can think of. So something I've uncovered in my research that also most people don't know.
Kevin?
Yes.
I'd like to stop you.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Yeah.
And repeat what you just said. No, I'm just kidding.
No. I just want to stop
That's
you.
fine.
Yeah.
He wants that to marinate in the minds of the people. We don't want to just rush over that because that's a very huge thing. My husband's being dramatic.
No, actually, you know, I mean, I just want you to know that what you just said is a very dangerous thing.
I believe it.
I just want you to pray before you decide whether you want to continue speaking or just because I love you and I care about you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I shared this last night, and I had some hateful comments. I don't mind.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Go ahead, continue.
It's truth. So
Yeah.
I speak as a historian. So I'll share what I believe is true.
Yeah.
And I'm not ashamed. So in World War I, one thing that we have forgotten about our history as well is that the federal government, they formed the so-called Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was called the Bureau of Investigation. They formed that in 1908. And during World War I, they had the first chance to really actively do their work in America. And they heavily targeted religions. And one of the religions that they targeted was Seventh-day Adventism. And why are they targeting Seventh-day Adventism? They're targeting Seventh-day Adventism because they are targeting all groups that they perceive to be liberal. And so the federal government during World War I was convinced that Adventists were socialists, communists, and that everything we were publishing was quote unquote red.
Wow.
And I mean RED, so the color. Okay?
Yeah.
And so they're doing this and they're saying this and they're infiltrating our camp meetings, they're infiltrating our churches, they are confiscating our mails, they are intercepting our telegrams, they are doing all sorts of stuff to block what we do. I could go on and on about that. Well, but the point and the thing I want to stress is this.
I'm sorry, can you go back over that? I've never heard that before. Not anything close to that. So don't feel like time is an issue right now. Can you talk about that a little bit more? I mean, they were like intercepting our mail and telegraphs.
Oh yeah. This is a time when the First Amendment rights in this country had never been defended in courts.
Okay.
And so the American federal government rode roughshod over all First Amendment rights during the First World War. And it was only going to be later, and they did throughout the 20th century, but this is the clearest time that they did.
So this
And
is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is
oh
just
my word, no! I have over 2,500 pages of declassified FBI files that I found.
Wow.
And no, we didn't know about this before. We just simply did not know about it. So it's no surprise that you're hearing it for the first time. I have shared this in a couple of academic papers, and there is a podcast with the Adventist Peace Fellowship where I talk about this some that's online. But yeah, we were not the only group that the government was seeking out. But we were intentionally targeted. And they came to us and they said, either you change what you're publishing or you're going to go to prison for a long time.
Wow.
They're saying that to our leaders.
Wow.
And here's the important factor. The reason they're saying that, one of the main reasons they're saying that is because of this doctrine that we have called the two-horned beast.
Mercy.
Okay? And before the Civil War, we
Hey,
are
I can't.
consistent.
Kevin, I can't anymore, man. I can't. I just can't.
I'm going too fast, huh?
No, you're not going too fast. We're gonna give him time to breathe.
I just need some time, man. Just give me a few moments, please. I don't want to miss anything else you have to say, but just give me a moment for myself, okay?
All right, you tell me when I can continue.
All right, okay. All right, go ahead.
All right. So the two-horned beast doctrine, it's from Revelation 13. And what we're saying before the Civil War is that America is this two-horned beast of Revelation because it looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. And that beast has two horns. One is supposed to represent religious liberty. The other one is supposed to represent social or civil liberty. And so America claims in its First Amendment, Declaration, etc., Constitution, that all men are created free and equal and entitled to equality, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, etc. And so those sound like great things. We're all supposed to be able to worship however we want. We're supposed to be able to get along and vote and be considered an equal in society, all those kinds of things. That's what America is claiming. And Adventists are saying that lamb-like beast looks and speaks like a dragon because it claims those liberties, but it denies them to religious minorities and civil, social minority, racial minorities specifically. The number one thing that they talked about the most was oppression to black people. And so Adventists continue to preach this doctrine, saying that America is currently, right now, the two-horned beast.
Not future.
Not in the future, not when they enact a national Sunday law at some point, but they are the beast now because they are oppressing racial minorities and, to a degree, but not as significantly, also religious groups who are trying to observe Saturday Sabbaths and other things. It's not just that issue alone. In the early period, we were never single-mindedly focused on the national Sunday law.
Yeah.
And so we're preaching this doctrine.
It wasn't
throughout.
just African Americans. I'm sorry to cut you off, but it was also Native Americans too. Wasn't that kind of clumped in there as well as like why we would look at America, the way America treated the Native Americans? Was that part of it?
That was also talked about some, never to the degree of blacks, but yes, it was. It was also included. We honestly haven't had as good of a history when it comes to Native Americans, but nevertheless, that was still there.
Yeah.
But slavery was the big issue at the time. And so it primarily focused on that, and then also lack of equal rights for blacks. But they do include Native Americans. And so Adventists are preaching this doctrine and claiming that America is this beast now. Okay? And they're continuing to preach this all the way up until World War I. And the government gets a hold of our literature, and as it turns out, they don't like to be identified as this two-horned beast of Revelation 13. They find that offensive. They find it subversive. They find it dangerous. They find it unpatriotic, 100% American, which was a huge phrase that everyone's throwing around during World War I era. You got to be 100% American. And so they come to us and they say, guys, this can't happen.
Wow.
And so one of the most popular books in Adventist history for colporteuring and other things was a book called Bible Readings for the Home Circle.
Yeah.
We were preaching and printing that doctrine in that book. In 1918, when the government comes knocking at our door, they say, change it or go to prison. And we say, okay, we'll change it. And they didn't tell other Adventists, but they changed it anyways. And what they did essentially is this. They said, okay, America is not the two-horned beast now. It's going to become that in the future.
Wow.
And also, it's not really America that's the two-horned beast. it's really just liberal Protestants within America that we've got to worry about, and they're going to end up taking control of the government.
Wow.
Okay,
And so there's going to be like a coup.
Wait, stop, because now I can't breathe. Because this is, I mean, and I heard you say this, because you said this on the Light Bearer meeting a couple of nights ago, or on the Zoom, and I heard it then, but just hearing you say it now, well, you didn't say quite that 3 nights ago. You didn't say that they came to the Adventist church and said, you have to stop preaching this, and we actually changed it. Ivor and I spoke together about it and said, you at an evangelistic series, that's how it's taught. It's that in the future, this is what will happen, but it's not the current. My husband has a sermon called Beast Mode. He's preached it in different ways. It's called Beast Mode, that he preached, well, recently, but several years ago originally. And it kind of was saying the same thing, but we did not have this history behind it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, this is the genesis of that moment when we start to really clearly start making this a future prophecy. And so this is what's going on. And they change it. You can look, I mean, I can show you the 1916 edition that came out just before the World War I.
Yeah.
And then you look at the 1918 edition, you compare those chapters, the titles are changed, the way they're talking about these things are totally different. I mean, I'm not making it up.
Yeah.
And actually Douglas Morgan pointed this out for the first time in his book, Adventism and the American Republic. But he did not know about the surveillance issue, at least to the extent that I have found out. And so this happens. And so Adventists do a lot to shift at this point. And so after World War I is over, I mean, World War I ended a couple of months after they're doing this to us, and we agree to change. And in the wake of that, we say, okay, we've got to change the way we do ministry and evangelism in America. And so the church starts to hold Bible conferences. The first one was in 1919, which we talk about all the time, at least right now, because we just went through the 100th anniversary.
Yeah.
But we only talk about what happens with Ellen White.
Yeah.
We don't talk about what happens at 1919 as a conference meant to control and train our evangelists so that they are no longer preaching, quote, a sensationalist message. And so Adventists are starting to do that in ministerial conferences as well as Bible conferences. And they're telling Adventists, don't start running out of the gate in your sermons with teaching Adventist distinctives. Draw them in with the gospel. Draw them in with what every evangelical is already going to believe. And then later, eventually, you can talk about things like the two-horned beast. But don't talk about it publicly in your evangelistic meetings, please. And so they're teaching them to do this kind of stuff. And they're training them to do this kind of stuff. And I'm not coming up with this on my own. So a historian named Howard B. Weeks wrote about this stuff in the 1960s. And he knew nothing about the government surveillance, nothing about what was a major motivating factor in prompting the Adventist church to make these shifts. He just saw this happening, thought it was just sensationalism during World War I, and said, oh, the church realized, hey, we've got to change. And so he writes his doctoral dissertation on this, and actually the Review and Herald publishes it. And so this stuff all ties in together, and you can see there was intentional, calculated maneuvers that our church made to do this. And I think that in this process, Adventists are wanting to draw closer and closer to evangelicalism so that they can be aligned against a common enemy, like Ivor just mentioned. And there's several other factors going on. As we're getting closer, it's during World War I that the evangelicals start to refer to us as a cult. We want to overcome that stigma so bad.
Yes. And that's
that we're going to do whatever we can to prove that they're wrong. And this leads to the 1950s questions on doctrine, which we talk about in so many other ways. But this is also hugely significant in the fact that we are trying to prove that we really are evangelicals. And that's all well and good. I don't have anything against evangelicals, and we do share many things theologically with them. However, these things come at a cost. And I think that they really need to be explored in more depth, because I don't think we realize currently how deep that cost was. But I think one of the casualties was race. I think another casualty was gender. But we're not talking about gender today.
Wow.
Benjamin.
Yeah. That
what did I get wrong, Ben? Correct me. Fix all my mistakes.
After that, I have nothing to say.
I mean, he went so much deeper.
I'm muting my video. I'm mute.
Benjamin, if you could, can you tell us about the history of The two-horned beast.
Put it on mute. No. Can I say this? Are we calling an audible?
Go ahead.
Okay, and Benjamin, you're still on mute. You're really literally on mute. Are you really talking? You're not talking.
No, I'm talking now.
Yeah.
Okay, can I say
okay.
this? This is for you and Kevin and
Yeah, then you can pick up with what you're going to say, Benjamin.
and this is an audible, and I need to make sure that our producer director knows, which is our son. We feel like I just feel like the Holy Spirit is moving and information is being shared, and we're at our Sabbath school time usually ends like in 10 minutes, and we don't want that. We don't want that to happen. So when I say call it audible, we're wanting to go into our divine worship service, which my husband has graciously said that we can continue with our discussion here, and
if you guys are available.
If you guys are available, that's
If you
why I'm
guys are
kind of
available.
asking you. And if so, he'll table his sermon for next week. Okay, let's see if everybody goes crazy over that. Hopefully not.
This is Ivor tabling a sermon. This is unprecedented.
It is unprecedented, but this is good stuff.
Yeah.
We're really learning here.
I'm muted right now, man. I'm speechless right now. I don't like preach for what.
And but I'm wondering, and I was hoping our director producer son would come and tell me, but I still would like to take a break in 10 minutes, not where everyone leaves, but just a break, just a short break, so that we can welcome them into the church service and just say another prayer over. Okay, our son says we can do that. So go ahead, answer Ivor's question now, Benjamin.
No, I'm fine. Let's go ahead and take the break. I'm fine.
You want to now? I mean, okay.
Well, we have 10 minutes left.
Yeah,
so,
we have 10 minutes for you to answer it.
But so
everybody says we vote to continue. So everyone's excited to learn because they've never heard this before.
yeah.
Just
Go
say,
ahead.
I would say to answer Ivor's question, Ivor or Tati, I can't remember who asked it, but to answer it in a couple of different ways. The first way is that some Adventists, many Adventists, never stopped social justice activism.
Yeah.
They stopped speaking truth to power and giving a really sophisticated and spiritual critique of the United States. I said on Light Bearers that Black Adventists have never had the luxury of dissecting politics from anything else. It has always been at our very door. It's always been in our community. I have several instances.
Hey, Benjamin, pause. You're saying that we have not had the luxury of separating politics from something else, from an issue. It has been politics for us. Slavery was politics.
Well, definitely. I mean, we were literally enslaved. So, I mean, you can, as they say, you can call it what you want. We're literally enslaved. I mean, you know, what you can call it a tomato, you know, but I mean, my goodness, this is dominating my entire life. And so I think that it is a matter of privilege to sort of compartmentalize aspects of your life. And indeed, I think that the younger generations are now realizing that things cannot be compartmentalized. The roads you drive on, the laws you live under, your mail, your job, everything is quote unquote politics. I mean, so you know, I mean, it is an artificial distinction.
Yeah.
And when you read the writings of Ellen G. White, which I did my dissertation on Ellen G. White and Black people, it was a 900-page dissertation, and I didn't even cover a fraction of it.
Mercy.
Ellen White never separates racism from spirituality. She never separates. Listen to this. And I'm you know, Kevin grew up in Arkansas. I lived in the South for a while, so we love our Southern Adventist brethren, but I've seen Southern Adventists who have had Confederate flags on their trucks.
Mercy.
I've seen Southern Adventists who have had Confederate flags in their houses. Listen to this quote of Ellen White's on the Confederacy. All right, she said this she wrote this in 1864. She said, Satan was the first great leader in rebellion. God is punishing the North that they have so long suffered the accursed sin of slavery to exist. For in the sight of heaven, it is a sin of the darkest dye. God is not with the South. Now, this is during the Civil War. God is not with the South, and he will punish them dreadfully in the end. Satan is the instigator of all rebellion. I saw that you, Brother A, have permitted your political principles to destroy your judgment and your love for the truth.
Wow.
Out true godliness from your heart. You have never looked upon slavery in the right light, and your views of this matter have thrown you on the side of the rebellion, which was stirred up by Satan and his host.
Wow.
Your views of slavery cannot harmonize sacred, important truths for this time. Did you hear that?
Now, we would be, in our days, some might say that that's a political statement.
She was saying that Satan was the instigator, was the creator of the Confederacy. Let that sink in when we're talking about Adventists and race and exactly what race is. She saw it as a spiritual issue.
Yeah. Not a political one. Not a political one.
She said Satan was the instigator of the Confederacy. And so here, the modern Confederates say that this is not about slavery. This is about our culture. This is about, individualization or whatever it is. It's about standing up for our rights. She says that Satan was the instigator of the Confederacy.
No.
Okay, so to get back to my main point, there is a whole stream of Adventists, both black and white, who have continually been engaging in social justice, civil rights, and this is worldwide.
Yeah,
we have of course, Nelson Mandela's kids went to an Adventist school. You had Adventist freedom fighters in South Africa. You had Adventist freedom fighters in Nazi Germany. But there was often a difference, and that is they were acting as individuals.
Yep.
They weren't, the conference could be saying one thing. For political reasons. I think that in many ways, politics has been our greatest enemy because we have often succumbed to political currents.
Yeah.
Mercy.
And, we've made, we said Hitler was a vegetarian. Literally, we said this. Literally. Adventist pastors in the Adventist conference said that Hitler was a vegetarian.
Have you guys seen that statement with I don't remember what magazine or what periodical it was in, where we were basically praising Hitler? I don't know. I can't remember where it was found, but it shocked me when I saw it for the first time. I was like, this is an Adventist journal praising Hitler.
Sure. We have Adventists in Rwanda who were heavily engaged in the Hutu and the Tutsi wars. I mean, throughout our history.
Yeah, and there's one point when it comes to World War II. A different historian has published this, so I can send anyone who wants the article. But it was our connections with Nazism were so fraught with difficulties that before World War II breaks out, there is an Adventist health worker who's really involved in eugenics. So a race betterment movement that drove the Nazi Party, was really popular in America. And she is sponsored. Her name is Hulda Yost. She was sponsored to come to America to preach eugenics. And I think it's sometime in the early 1930s or mid 1930s, before the war breaks out. She is sponsored by two entities: the Ministry of Propaganda for the Nazi Party and the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We were in league with the Nazis in bringing someone to preach eugenics in America in the 1930s. That is a sobering thought.
Okay, so Ivor, can I continue though?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
listen.
That was a powerful point.
And I'm just glad you stopped there, because I'm working on something. And that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, something's cooking. In the
Something's
oven.
cooking.
Something's cooking in the oven. Benjamin, can we pause? Can we just, we're not going to stop and take our break. We're just going to pray over what we've done, welcome, and let people know this is what we're doing because it's 11:30. So people normally are tuning in for church, and by majority, nobody wants us to stop. They don't even want us to take a break, an official break. So we're just going to pray and continue on.
So Benjamin, we'll pick up with you after the prayer.
So you can finish your point. Okay? Is that okay?
Do you want to pray?
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, just thank you. We thank you for this information that we're learning, Lord. It's teaching, Lord, all of us just how we need to study more, Lord, and just understand our past and the history, Lord, and just get a better understanding, Lord. I thank you for just all that, how you have led our church in the past, how you led the founders to do what was right during that time that they were living in, and taking the risk and being courageous, Lord. And we thank you for this time that we can just all come together and listen and pray and learn. And we just pray that your Holy Spirit would continue to bless us as we're moving forward into our church service. And we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
With that, I know most of you have been here since the beginning of Sabbath school, and this is the first time we're doing this, but we're just going to continue on through our worship service. If you tuned in after the beginning of the Sabbath school time, I just want to reintroduce who is with us. We have Kevin Burton, who is with us, and he is an instructor at Southern Adventist University. He is also working on a dissertation that deals with Millerites and Adventists as abolitionists. And so if you've been listening, you can tell that has done a lot of study. And so he is currently working on that dissertation. And we can't wait until it turns into a book, because what he shared already has been a blessing. We also have Benjamin Baker, who has a doctorate in history, and he operates the Black Seventh-day Adventist History.org. And I should also say that I did say that Kevin is an instructor at Southern University, but he works in the history department. So we're just happy to have both of them here. They have been a blessing. We are talking about these issues because of the current situation that we find ourselves in, and then specifically as Seventh-day Adventists, what is our role? What should we be doing at this time? Because you've heard a lot of people, I know I've personally heard it, just have a lot of confusion about what we're supposed to be doing. And so what we're trying to do is look backwards to our history as Seventh-day Adventists, look at the Word of God as well, and see how God has led us in the past, to see what we could be doing currently at this time.
Yeah, and it's been just what they have shared so far has been tremendous. The technical term is fire. And it's just
the technical term.
Yes, the technical term is fire.
The social media term.
Yeah. So it's a lot of this just has
He's speechless.
Has me speechless, and it's just some good stuff that we're hearing here. So we're just gonna. Go ahead.
Right before we go right back in, we're taking a short break. We're not. This is our break. But I just want to remind. I know some of our local church members and other people are just signing in now, because this is normally where our Sabbath school Zoom from church for the other classes are ending, and people are tuning in for church. Just want to remind you, those who are members of our church, but also everyone who's listening, you can give to the Campbell Seventh-day Adventist Church. If you're wanting to give and donate there, you can go to campbellsdachurch.com/online giving. That's campbellsda.com/online giving. And so with that, we want to continue on with our guest, and we're going to have Benjamin pick it up and continue where he was sharing before we took our break.
Yes, I believe that your question was, how did Adventism kind of drop the ball on their original social justice activism and outspokenness. And I was saying that at times, maybe the Adventist structure, maybe the Adventist administrative structure, or Adventists as a whole dropped the ball, but individuals have always been, individual Adventists have always been leaders. I would say leaders in the civil rights movement. We have James Childs. He was a Kentucky lawyer, and he was one of the first blacks to argue against a racist law in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. We have Mary Britton, who was a tireless activist, and this is all in the spirit and vein not only of Ellen White when she said disobey the Fugitive Slave Act, because we know just because something is a law doesn't make it righteous. But at one time, slavery was a law.
Yeah.
At one time, slavery was legal.
Yes.
In the United States. And so it's not just Ellen White saying disobey the Fugitive Slave Act. Two Adventists. She's an Adventist leader, two Adventists. It's your divine duty to disobey the Fugitive Slave Act. And of course, we know that many Adventists were involved in the Underground Railroad. We don't know how many because it was illegal, so you kept it quiet. I mean, now you can't just, it's not like, just finding something on the ground, it's just there. No, you have to dig into it because people were literally suppressing the documents and the evidence that they were involved in the Underground Railroad.
Wow. Wow.
Because it was illegal.
Yeah.
So Adventists were always flouting the law.
We were in
slavery because slavery was law.
So we were involved in illegal activity.
Oh, certainly, because
Wow.
we've always propounded, Acts 5:20, we ought to obey God rather than
That's
man.
right. That's right.
So this is one of our, one of the early pioneers' main tenet in terms of the American laws. We will obey the laws of America as long as they are just and righteous and in line with God's principles. And so we see Adventists all throughout history. Irene Morgan in 1943, some 10 years before Rosa Parks, she's on a Greyhound bus, and she is told to vacate her seat. She just had a miscarriage, and she's told to vacate her seat because a white man needed it. Okay, she's on a bus. This is in Virginia, and she refused because it was an unjust law. And the police officers, and this is a Seventh-day Adventist, and the police officers came in and physically dragged her. Police brutality is nothing new.
Wow.
We have a rich heritage of Adventists, Black Adventists in particular, decrying and protesting against police brutality. From Owen Troy to T.R.M. Howard, you name it. There's a rich history. This was happening in the 30s, 40s. I know of a Millerite Black man who was abused by cops, by the police. So this is nothing new. Irene Morgan, as a result of not only her refusing to get up, we call it her seated stand, if you know what I mean. Her seated stand. Not only by refusing to give up, but by refusing to admit that she did anything wrong and refusing to pay the court fine for resisting arrest and getting up from her seat and not getting up from her seat. There was a law, there was a Supreme Court decision, Morgan v. I believe the state of Virginia, which outlawed, which illegalized segregation, racial segregation in interstate busing. We have Terrence Roberts, who was a part of the Little Rock Nine. This is 1953, who helped segregate the Little Rock schools, and as you know, as an extension, American schools. He was a Seventh-day Adventist.
Wow.
We have Seventh-day Adventists who were involved with, Vincent Harding, who was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, one of his main speechwriters, was a Seventh-day Adventist. We have on the March on Washington in 1963, directly behind Martin Luther King to his right, there was an Adventist woman who was the daughter of A. Wellington Clark, an early Black Adventist minister. Her name was Yolanda Clark, and she performed for Martin Luther King at the March on Washington. We have Adventists all throughout the civil rights movement. And so, black and white, I might add. And there was a strain, many members of our church who never stopped that that activist spirit that actuated the early Adventists and the Millerites.
Were they? How would you answer the argument that they were being political?
When they would participate in these things.
They were not focused on the three angels' messages. They were getting sidetracked by side issues.
I would say that the Adventist witness from the very beginning is that racism is a spiritual issue.
Yeah.
I just read the Ellen White quote where she says that Satan instigated the rebellion. Satan was behind the Confederacy. And she says that Satan actuated, Satan animated masters when they were enslaving blacks and whipping them, that was Satan who was actuating them. So Ellen White takes it out of any so-called political realm, and she forever makes it a spiritual issue for us.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's vital. Yeah. She forever divorces those two artificial and meaningless constructs.
Yes.
Now, for those who say that it's only a political issue, many Adventists had social justice jobs. They were lawyers, and we know what Ellen White's, and I'm talking a lot about Ellen White because we hold her to be a prophet. And she was a co-founder and leader of the church. She says that we know the famous quote in education, do you have dreams that you can make laws that will impact the nation and that you can sit on the highest political boards? Read the quote, age 17, is it 20? What is it, education something? Help me out. And so she always saw Adventists as helping to create just laws for the nation. We know of her encouragement of A.T. Jones's extensive political, speeches in front of Congress and the Senate vis-a-vis religious liberty. So she was always for Adventists creating a just and righteous nation. But I can't stress it strongly enough that early Adventists, as well as Ellen White, saw racism at its core as a spiritual issue. And when we look at Derek Chauvin, the man who had his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we know that Ellen White would say something like, I mean, even in our own thinking, it's like, this is devilish.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something supernatural going on here now.
Yes.
This is not just normal, this is not humanity. And this is indeed what she says about slavery and racism, that you're losing your humanity and the devil is actually actuating you. You're made in the image of God. The people you're oppressing are made in the image of God, but you are literally defacing his image and you are becoming a brute beast to inflict racism and harm on fellow human beings in the image of God. And that's what Derek Chauvin is doing when he's, putting his knee on George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And so we err, I think, greatly when we divorce this from spirituality and say, it's something else. Adventists are very clear, early Adventists were very clear that racism was a spiritual issue that manifested itself and that it was directly positioned in the Great Controversy. It was directly positioned in prophecy. As we've already said with the Lamb-like beast of Revelation 13, 11 through 18, as we already said in terms of the identification of Babylon, but also in terms of the second coming. They often believed that the Civil War, you can read the writings, the Civil War, and other race-based events would usher in the second coming. So it's always been tied up with Adventists.
I think to illustrate that, though, it's also true that in the 20th century, there is that duplicitousness, right, Ben? I mean, you stress that this is Adventists acting primarily as individuals, which is part of the troubling factor of it. And so, for example, in the civil rights era, where Ben has just shared what's true, like we had so many Adventists who were not just in the civil rights movement, but leaders in the civil rights movement 100 years after slavery was abolished. And you see at the same time, the editor of the Review and Herald, the Adventist Review, F.D. Nickel, okay, he's a white guy, and he's telling Adventists, white Adventists in particular, of course, he's saying, don't get involved with the civil rights movement because it's political. The Three Angels message has nothing to do with politics. I want to show you a picture of something that's going on at the exact same time that Nickel is saying these words. Can you see that?
Wow. Yeah, we can see it.
What is that? That is, as it says in the caption, 1,000 Adventist college students speaking out against tobacco.
Wow.
In a big way, with a 7-mile march complete with placards and banners. And yeah, they say, ban the butt, stop cancer now, thou don't want, you don't want it. You know, all this kind of, I mean, they're holding signs just like people are now, just like they were in the civil rights movement. And our leaders are saying, our white leaders are saying, don't get in politics. What is this? What is this? I mean, give me weak. That is so hypocritical, so duplicitous. And that's what Adventism became in the 20th century. And we created this argument, don't get involved in politics. Well, I agree with that to a point. I mean, I don't think that you should get super involved in partisanship and have things that challenge your loyalty to God. We can go into that. But let's not talk about saying, this is, you know, you can't get in a march because that's political. We were doing it. We were doing it.
Yeah.
It was literally a race thing. White Adventists were not wanting to get involved because it was about uplifting a human race. That, if you can excuse my language, is damnable. That idea is diabolical. That is the kind of thing that Ellen White is speaking out against in her lifetime. And have we forgotten our prophet? Have we forgotten her? I think that we have. And that makes me very upset. And to see people, even today, you guys have probably all seen it. People putting videos up and say, look, here's a white officer kneeling on a white man's neck and he died too. This isn't about race. Give me a break, guys. I'm speaking as a white male, and I can tell you this. I have never, and you have never, if you're white, been attacked or assaulted or killed for centuries because you're white. Black people have. So this is a race issue. Whether or not you want to admit it, doesn't matter. It is a race issue. And Seventh-day Adventists, our pioneers, said we have to speak out against that injustice. This is a problem. Uplifting humanity is part of the gospel.
Yeah.
We must do so.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you said something, you said, have we forgotten our prophet? And I think that for this generation, and probably even my generation, because she's not viewed, the things that you've shared today, you and Benjamin, it gives such a different look for Ellen White and even our founders. Like, again, I will say that if our young people understood and heard this and were taught this, they would have a different view of our prophet. And they wouldn't want her to be forgotten or just think that, you know, as they say now, she was very woke.
Yeah.
Very.
I would say that, you know, I think one of the problems that we are facing as a church, and you're given some of the history and some things that I have not heard before, and I'm so glad I'm hearing them right now because, as I said, I am cooking something in the kitchen. And
But it's not ready.
It's not ready yet, but it will be ready very soon. And what I'm seeing is there's an undercurrent that most people are not aware of in our church. And some of these things you're mentioning and that you've both shared just are helping me to see the dots are connecting as to why we are where we are right now. And I think to a large degree, I want, I'm a peacemaker. And I like to see the best in everybody. And
That's his personality type.
yeah, that's my personality type. So, And here's the thing, man, like over these last few weeks, I've been getting some emails, you know, I used to like you, now I hate you. Yeah, I mean, just stuff like, and I'm not mad. I'm like, man, I get it. You know, and that's actually what I was going to preach about today. I'm going to share a little bit about what I was going to preach about today, which is really simply this, guys. And I may still preach it at another time.
Here comes the entire sermon.
No, not the entire sermon.
No, he's not going to do that.
Do you remember, you guys may know of a statement, shut up and dribble.
I don't know if they heard that.
Okay.
Laura Ingraham to LeBron James.
Yeah, shut up and dribble, right? Like, hey, you're here to entertain us. We don't want to hear about your concerns. Now, forget about the black-white issue and the political issues surrounding that, but to a certain degree, I believe Satan is basically trying to tell the Adventist church, shut up and dribble, right? Don't get involved in this just go preach the three angels' messages. Just go, keep hearing good sermons. I want to hear my highlight is Sabbath, because I get to sit down and hear a great sermon. And as long as I can hear a great sermon, I'm good to go. But when God's like, hey, no, I need you to open your mouth on behalf of the oppressed. I need you to actually be about action. No. We don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. I just want to hear a good sermon. Mm-hmm. Please just be quiet and preach a good sermon. And I think we've gotten to that place now where we have mistaken good sermons for gospel life. Right? Jesus came into this world. The Bible tells us the Word became flesh. So what happens when the Word became flesh? They killed him. When the Word became actionable, they killed him. Before that, we're God's people. The Word. When the Word manifests itself in the flesh, yeah, we don't like you. And I think to a great degree, we are fine with the Word as long as we don't have to make it flesh. As long as we don't have to make it practical and go out there and be a part of the community and speak to the ills of society, we're good. When it's time for action, we don't want to hear that. Mm-hmm. But I think there's an undercurrent that has been leading to the place where we are now. And I think people have, to a certain degree, ignorantly gotten there. They don't understand the undercurrent. And so they're in a place where they don't even realize where they are. They think they're being genuine. And this is the Laodicean condition, right? Mm-hmm. You're rich and increase with goods. And you don't realize that you're sick. You don't realize you have an issue. Mm-hmm. So, the Bible says, search your, people have said, hey, I've searched my heart. And I know that I don't have this issue. I'm good to go. I'm clean. But the issue is probably that you're the one that's searching your heart. Because the Bible says, search me, O God. Mm-hmm. Right? Search me, O God. When God looks, he's going to show you stuff that you don't like. Mm-hmm. When you look, hey, I searched and I'm good to go. Mm-hmm. Me, I'm not you fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. But when
if I could just share something very quickly.
Yeah.
And I know that the cardinal rule is to never interrupt a preacher.
No. Go ahead, man.
But what you just said reminded me of Ellen White's statement. She gave a talk to a portion, a constituency of the General Conference in 1891. And she had, I would encourage all of your listeners to Google Councils on Blacks, Ellen G. White. Councils on Blacks, Ellen G. White. A compilation I put together of all of her statements on black people, and it's 1,500 pages.
Wow.
And so this is for the people that say that we shouldn't care about race and this is not an important issue. Wow. Okay. 1,500 pages.
Wow.
On her speaking on black, and just read the sorts of things that she says. Anyway, in 1891, the famous "Our Duty to the Colored People" address. I'm sure all of you have heard about this. This is March 21, 1891, to a General Conference constituency. the main leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She said, after my severe illness 1 year ago, many things which the Lord had presented to me seemed lost to my mind, but they have since been repeated. Listen to this, Ivor. I know that which I now speak will bring me into conflict. This I do not covet, for the conflict has seemed to be continuous of late years. But I do not mean to live a coward or die a coward, leaving my work undone. Then she goes on, I must follow in my master's footsteps, capital M. I must follow in my master's footsteps. She says it has become fashionable to look down upon the poor and upon the colored race in particular. But Jesus, the master, was poor, and he sympathizes with the poor, the discarded, the oppressed, and declares that every insult shown to them is as if shown to himself. Now, this is given after 1888, and we can talk a lot about righteousness by faith and how Ellen White believed that its true application was how you treat the least of these among us. Often links righteousness by faith, the 1888 message, with the treatment of black people. Some believe that that's why she was sent to Australia in 1891. They said, we got to get rid of her. And so they shipped her there. I'm not confirming or denying that. But she started speaking a lot about black people, and the next thing you know, she was way down under on the other side of the world.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
Like
Wow.
Kevin smiling. We won't go there. I think she was sent there for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was only this.
Yeah.
She says, I know what's going to happen. I know what I'm going to say is going to bring me into conflict. But she says, I must follow in Jesus' steps. In Jesus' steps. She says, I am more and more surprised as I see those who claim to be children of God possess so little of the sympathy, tenderness, and love which actuated Christ. Would that every church, north and south, were imbued with the spirit of our Lord's teachings. While at St. Louis a year ago, as I knelt in prayer, these words were presented to me as if written with a pen of fire. All ye are brethren. Wow. Now, when you look at the Ellen White compilation, Counsels on Blacks, she had myriad, she had manifold, a plethora of visions on race. Study that, in which she said, God showed me this, and it was about race. For those of you who don't think this is important, who don't think this is a spiritual issue, the Spirit of God rested upon me in a wonderful manner, and matters were open to me in regard to the church at St. Louis and in other places. Now, what happened at St. Louis is that Charles M. Kinney, one of the earliest Black Adventist ministers, had brought in blacks to the Adventist church. There was only one Adventist church there. Folks, there's a reason now why in many cities still, in many places, there's a Black Adventist church and a white Adventist church. There is a reason. There is a reason. Because in St. Louis, when Charles Kinney, a Black Adventist man, when he brought in blacks to the white Adventist church, they treated the blacks so bad that many of them left the church. They were converts to Adventism. They believed the message, but they were treated so bad by the white Adventists in the St. Louis church that they left. They said, how is this the truth when they treat us like this? And they left. And Ellen White was traumatized. She would say later that, I can't think of what happened to me in St. Louis without having dread come over. It was like PTSD.
Wow.
Because these were precious souls, believers who embraced the message, and they left because the church members treated them so harshly based on the color of their skin. And the situation was so bad that she had a vision in the St. Louis church, and the vision simply echoed what Acts said, what Jesus said, all ye are brethren. And so this was the occasion for she says, The matters were open to me in regard to the Church of St. Louis and other places. The spirit and words of some in regard to members of the church were an offense to God. They were closing the door of their hearts to Jesus. Now, how is racism? How is how you treat others in the person of Christ? How is this not present truth? How is this not an important issue for us to attend to right now? How is this not? She said that when they were racist, when they discriminated against these black believers, they were closing the doors of their heart to Jesus. So how is this not a spiritual issue when you're closing your heart to Jesus by being racist? Okay, she goes on. Among those in St. Louis who believe the truth, there are colored people who are true and faithful, precious in the sight of the God of heaven, and they should have just as much respect as any other of God's children. Those who have spoken harshly to them or have despised them have despised the purchase of the blood of Christ, and they need the transforming grace of Christ in their own hearts, that they may have the pitying tenderness of Jesus toward those who love God with all the fervor of which they themselves are capable. The color of the skin does not determine character in the heavenly courts.
Amen.
She's saying, I know that this is going to bring me in conflict. I'm going to say it anyway. And she squarely places racism, how you treat others who are made in the image of God. She squarely places it as a spiritual issue, as a determiner if Christ is in your heart or not, as a determiner as if you will be in heaven or not.
Let me ask this. First of all, just real quick, should Protestants protest?
Either one of you can answer that.
Should they protest?
Should Protestants protest? I mean, what does the name Protestant mean?
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. That's how it originates.
I thought that was going to take a second.
We gave Kevin too much of a break.
But I mean, if we call ourselves Protestant, go ahead, Benjamin.
Martin Luther was the first one with the with the signs, the placard in the riot. The 95 propositions, the 95 thesis. And really, when you look at the 95 thesis, a lot of those, it was not only quote unquote spiritual issues, but they were justice issues.
Yeah.
There was robbery going on. You know, people who barely had enough, you know, they were giving money for, give me the term.
The indulgences.
Indulgences. Yeah.
Indulgences. And it was robbing them. And there was a lot of issues about the humanity of people.
Yeah. And
fairness and justice. So the very nature of Protestantism, and of course, how Adventists came about is a protest.
Yes.
Of injustice. As Kevin pointed out, it wasn't just some, you know, esoteric doctrines. It was Babylon was originally identified over slavery.
Yeah. So
our very nature is to protest. And I would add, Ivor, that when you look at the early Adventists, their patriotism it's very intriguing looking at them through the lens of patriotism, because while they believed that America was indeed exceptional, they also believed that America was very unexceptional. So you would have them saying that there's no other nation upon which God has blessed so richly, but at the same time, they said it was cursed.
Yeah.
Okay, Ellen White said that slavery cursed the very soil of America. And she said that there's going to have to be great atonement for the way blacks have treated. In fact, she believed that the 700,000 approximately men who died in the Civil War and the great ravage that occurred from that was God's judgment. Near the end of her life, she says, I fear that the color line is always going to be a problem. There's going to be a revival of slavery, and there's race wars. And of course, we know that Tulsa, the great race war of Tulsa, the Tulsa riot happened shortly after her death. I mean, years after her death.
Yeah.
And there were more in the 1960s, et cetera, and even today. And so she knew that this was never going to stop. And in fact, the founders believed that America, the very nature was dragonic, was a dragon. And so it will not stop. It will not end.
Yeah.
Slavery was not an aberration. It was the
foundation.
It was an essence. Joseph Bates, who was particularly virulent and outspoken against America, one time he wrote, it's almost like he just burst into a screed. He said, quote, "This boasted land of liberty, this heaven-daring, soul-destroying, slave-holding, neighbor-murdering country."
Wow. Wow.
They had a real critique of America that I think many Adventists today
would shudder.
Would shudder at.
Yeah.
And as Kevin pointed out, with the rise of the FBI, and the FBI has been one of the greatest enemies of Black people. I mean, horrid enemy. I'm just, J. Edgar Hoover.
History.
Yeah.
With the rise of the FBI, Adventists said we need to tone down this anti-American rhetoric because it is detrimental to our respectability, to our life in the suburbs, to our social standing. It is detrimental. So it has been toned down.
So would you guys agree, or are you saying then that people today who deny that the Lamb is currently speaking like a dragon, never took a break from speaking like a dragon, that it is partially due to this transition of, okay, that is future. It will speak as a dragon in the future. So it spoke as a dragon in the past. Yeah, we could probably agree to that.
But it's taking a dragon break right
But
now.
it's taking a dragon break. It's no longer speaking as a dragon. Things are good now. What's everybody complaining about? I get it. If I was in those days, I would have been an abolitionist with them, rah, rah, rah. But the beast has gotten better. What are you guys talking about?
If people are going to say, and this is probably mostly white people are going to say that they would have been an abolitionist back then. If they say that and they are not speaking out against racial injustices now, I'm calling their bluff.
Yeah. No.
There's no way that would be true. It sounds nice. I'd like to think of myself as the most unracist, most awesome white person in the world. But if I'm not speaking out now against truth, like for truth, against racial injustice, give me a break. Yeah, so Adventists were definitely.
You're saying that because, I'm sorry, you're saying that because it was riskier then than it is now.
It was more risky back then, definitely. It certainly is still risky now, but it was even more risky back then, for a variety of reasons. And so to get back to your question, I do think to be Adventist, to be Protestant, but particularly the Adventist variety of Protestantism, you must be protesting against these things. I mean, after showing you the picture of protesting against cigarette smoke and cigarettes, etc., how can you tell me that is okay and speaking out and protesting against racism is not okay? That makes no sense in any way, shape, or form, no matter how you want to slice it or dice it. And so I can tell you, like you wanted a quote. Here's one from Ellen White. I'm getting this. I could get you the source. I don't remember exactly where she said this, but she's writing a letter to Adventists who are going to Africa as missionaries. And she tells them this: remember, you are to be reformers, not bigots. And she says so much over and over again, Adventists are to be reformers. Reform was so thoroughly intertwined in every kind of way with what it meant to be Adventism that we have definitely dropped the ball. And so you're kind of asking the question, is it okay to sort of preach on the two-horned beast and say that it's going to be, it kind of stopped being a dragon for a while, and et cetera, and it was a dragon back at one point, but it's not anymore. This is of course up to interpretation, but as a historian, I think absolutely not. I don't think there's any way that you can defend an answer from Ellen White, from the Bible, from our understanding, our heritage, to defend and say that America has not always been speaking like a dragon.
Yeah. Well,
it has always been doing that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that, the dragon voice stopped in the 1860s. Okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe not the 1860s, but definitely the 1960s, because now black people could vote. So, what racism? What are you talking about? And to me, when I try to say, listen, forget about, just think prophetically. Just think prophetically. Where in the prophecy does it say it will speak like a dragon? Where is the future tense of that word? It's not there.
Right.
Horns of a lamb speaks like a dragon.
So
and yes, it will speak as a dragon in the sense of we know something's coming, but it's not saying that before that it was just a lamb.
Right.
And so I think there's a very, and I'm finding it becoming increasingly difficult to speak without being told that I'm being political. Right? When I'm just like, hey, look at Bible prophecy. Have you read? I'm like, you guys, prophecy above politics. And we're getting to a place now where I'm beginning to fear, honestly, like, today I was like, what do I preach? And why? Why am I I'm not an entertainer, so I'm not here to entertain you. If you're not going to listen to things that are like the Word of God is saying, do this thing, what is the purpose of preaching? You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's getting to a place where it's like, look, if the preaching of the Word is not going to actually transform you and actually transform hearts and transform societies, then I am not LeBron James. I'm not a basketball player. I'm not here.
An entertainer.
I'm not an entertainer. So nothing against entertainers, but God has not called pastors to be entertainers and to please people's ears and, hey, don't say stuff that's going to be offensive to us or challenge us. And this is the thing, the Word of God is never meant to like bash anyone over the head. The Word of God is meant to bash Satan over the head. So if you get in the way, because I'm trying to bash Satan, and you're like, why'd you hit me? I wasn't trying to hit you. I was going after Satan. Why are you standing in the way? This is not against you. You understand what I'm saying? The Word of God is not meant to like beat people down and make people feel, bad and whatever. It's like we're trying to win souls. You see what I'm saying? And then people begin to take stuff so personally, like, oh, you're preaching against me and the left, or you're preaching against me and the right. And the Word of God is just getting lost. Just lost.
Ivor, just a word here. And I've heard some of your messages, particularly your one about the Good Samaritan. And Jesus's statements or Jesus's teachings about race and if you will, the last days, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, ethnos shall rise against ethnos, ethnicity against ethnicity. When you mentioned getting hit, I want to share something from Ellen White's life. And like I said, I'm talking a lot about Ellen White because I think that her activism, her involvement in anti-racism is very instructive for us. You recall that when she was a girl, I believe 9 years old, she was hit in the face with a rock.
Yeah.
And it disfigured her appearance. Some say that it caused some brain damage. I can't verify or deny that. But whatever it did, it sunk her into a terrible depression in which she had to grapple with. A young girl, she's grappling with having to drop out of school. Obviously, her physical appearance is greatly marred. And she sort of talks like it was the end of her world because she couldn't be a scholar, she couldn't be a student anymore. And there was some ostracism based on her appearance from her contemporaries, from her classmates, and from her friends. But during that time, we know that she was haunted by the notion of an eternally burning hell. And that was, she was continually ruminating on that. And so all of these things converge. Her dad comes from a long trip and he doesn't recognize her because her appearance is so marred from the stone. From this experience, she develops this tremendous and profound understanding of the compassion of God for the marginalized, for those who aren't accepted, for those who aren't beautiful, for those who don't reach a certain standard. And I believe that it's from there that she developed her sort of a perspective, humanity.
True empathy.
A perspective of, true empathy, of pathos, of ministry.
Yeah.
To the least of these. Like I said, Google Councils on Blacks, Ellen White, 1,500 pages she wrote on blacks. And throughout her entire life, I believe that she identified with the underdog and those who were oppressed. There are touching scenes in which, she's, her husband, James, gives money to poor black people. He gives money to, just poor people in general, of course. Her son went down south to minister to blacks during the Reconstruction period. And I don't think that this is incidental. Because her entire life, I believe that she was, and she says that if you're a parent, you focus and give more attention and more love on the child that is disadvantaged, that needs it more. She always had that profound empathy. And I also want to appeal to Seventh-day Adventists, who I have called the N-word of Christendom. They were the N-word of Protestants. Because the way that Protestants often related to them was the way that the American Republic often related to black people. They looked at them as not true Christians. They looked at Adventists as not true Christians. They looked at Adventists as others. They looked at Adventists as a cult. They discriminated against Adventists because of who they inherently were. Adventists went to church on the Sabbath and things like this. So our whole, much of our existence, we've really understood what it was about, what it was like being an outcast, being marginalized. But yet, too often, we see Adventists reflecting the world. The world thinks about race and about black people. And instead of us experiencing the marginalization, so being leaders in how Christians should look at race and should treat the least of these, instead we just echoed society's views. And so when you asked earlier, how did we end up with regional conferences? How did we end up with separate race-based conferences? How did we end up simply reflecting the mores of broader society and not being prophetic as we once were? The way that happened was that when Adventism expanded to the South, in order for our evangelism, for our mission to operate smoothly and successfully, we started reflecting the social constructs of the South.
Mercy.
Because you have, the Southern Missionary Society, Edson White, Will Palmer, and others. They could not operate, let's say, with a white. Let's say Emma White is teaching blacks on the Morning Star. They were vilified in the newspapers of Yazoo City, Lintonia, Vicksburg, these places, because they said they're racially promiscuous, they're racially mixing. And so literally, whites started attacking the members of the Southern Missionary Society. I mean, physically attacking. One person named Nate Olvin, he was shot, he was whipped, You know, I mean, they kind of rolled out on his house. And so as a result, the Southern Missionary Society had to leave Yazoo City, had to leave Vicksburg, and they had to kind of disperse. And it was at that time where they said, it's best for blacks to work for blacks. Mm-hmm. It is best for whites to work for whites. Because otherwise we will be so vilified, so persecuted, not only by the KKK, but by other white terrorists, that we can't fulfill our mission of evangelism.
Right, right.
Even Ellen White succumbed to this thinking. She said, in order for our missiological advantage, you know, in order for us to do missions the best and smoothly and to get the gospel out to everybody, and she, of course, she was looking out for her son. She didn't want her son, you know, of course, her daughter ended up dying of malaria, which she got in the South.
Yeah.
I mean, her daughter was a martyr to the cause, her daughter-in-law. But she's looking out as a mother for her son, and as a denominational leader, she's saying, I want to preserve life. She made statements that, as a temporary measure,
Right.
we want you to observe the mores of the South, of the Jim Crow South, in order so that we can preach the gospel. All right, that's where it came from. And this is in, let's say, 1900s, okay? And then when she died, we never got rid of that practice.
Yeah, right.
We never got rid of that sensibility. And that's when I believe, Ivor and Atante, that racism started taking over. Like she would say in 1899 to a black man and a white woman, don't get married. You know, interracial marriages is not best right now. And we had into the 70s and 80s, people still quoting Ellen White on that.
Yeah.
I just read
70, 80 years later.
Yes. Right.
And an interesting dynamic emerges. We start using her to reinforce our racism.
Yeah.
Mercy.
Okay, not when she was prophetic, but when she was responding to Jim Crow, and we really wanted to grow the church, and we were kind of, you know, missiology has always been about adapting to the situation in the country.
Yeah.
Okay, in the region. I mean, you know, whatever sort of missiologist you are, it's about adaptation. But we took that and we used it as an echo of our own racism. And so blacks kept working for blacks and whites kept working for whites. And in fact, if you look in the 1900s, the 1900s, they had a Scandinavian department, they had a German department, they had, because of course, you know, immigrants were coming to America.
Yeah.
And so it was about you working for your own ethnic group, not only linguistically, because, you know, ethnic groups were still, you know, the Germans were speaking German, you know, et cetera.
Right.
But mentality, color, ethnicity. And so that never stopped. The blacks were working for blacks, the whites were working for whites. And black churches were established, only black people, white churches were established. And that became embedded into the structure, into the thinking. And so really the regional conferences and the other racial expedients, I could say, are indeed a product of Jim Crow. And it was never Black Adventists' desire. Black Adventists always wanted inclusion with whites.
Right. Right.
Because they had better facilities. So Wright's pictures with the white fountain and the colored fountain. The colored fountain's rickety. It doesn't work. It's, you know, the pipes are broken. If anything, they just had better facilities. And so, I mean, blacks were always into integration. But it was many times, you know, the whites who said, no, you know, it's best for you to work, you know, for yourselves. And so regional conferences were really developed upon that expedience. And you saw an evangelistic explosion because hitherto the tithes and the offerings and the monies were funneled away from the black work into evangelism of whites and others. And so black evangelism wasn't getting the attention. And of course, Ellen White rebuked this heavily because people were giving money to the Southern work, to the work among blacks. And she said, because of racism, I mean, she writes loads on this. Racism, those funds were being diverted to other things. to other, white ministries, because the blacks couldn't pay much tithe. Because blacks in the South were poor at the time.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see any return on the tithe and offering monies that you sent down south. Okay, so with the regional conferences, what we see is an explosion of the black membership, because now blacks can focus on missionizing, on evangelizing among blacks, and monies can go to that.
Yeah.
And the energy and the leadership can go to that. So they've been a tremendous blessing.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, that whole blacks work for blacks, whites work for whites, we worship separately, that is a legacy of the Jim Crow, the nadir of race relations in America.
Wow.
It's never changed, it never stopped.
Yeah.
And so with the call to dissolve regional conferences, what have you, you have to ask yourself, has our thinking changed?
Right.
Because the churches on the local level and such will still be black and white if we dissolve the conferences.
Right.
Right.
Jim Crow thinking's still there.
Yeah.
Right.
That is the question.
Yeah.
Wow. This is education.
That whole Jim Crow mindset, it has dominated our denomination. It is the story of race relations in our church.
Yeah. Wow.
I feel like all we can say is wow. And wow. Yeah, that was heavy. I have to, because there's been tons of questions, but something I wanted to ask Kevin, since you brought it out and mentioned it probably in our Sabbath School hour, actually, people wanted a reference for the 1916 and the 1919 intervention, or the government coming down saying you need to change this message. Do you have references for that? Because people, this is the first time they've heard it, so they're just wanting some type of something they can study.
By the way,
okay.
You mentioned that in Sabbath school.
Yes.
Some people who are getting on now, or who are on now, did not
probably have like
hear
200
that.
more that haven't heard that.
Okay.
So
you want me
please
to do
just-
a quick recap?
Quick recap.
And then you can reference it.
So what Ivor and Atante are talking about is that during World War I, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it was actually called just the Bureau of Investigation at the time. They took the name Federal Bureau of Investigation in the 1930s, but it's the same organization. They heavily targeted religious groups, and one of those groups that they targeted was the Seventh Adventist Church. And the reason that I've uncovered this, and it's something that historians had not known about before, I uncovered it a couple of years ago. The reason I uncovered it is because one of my professors at Florida State University, where I'm doing my PhD, he's one of the very few who's really interested in the intersections between religion and surveillance. And so in taking class from him, I realized that this was becoming a thing among scholars right now. It's like, wow, that's interesting. And for my comprehensive examinations for my program, I read the book FBI and Religion. Okay, it came out a couple of years ago, edited by Sylvester Johnson and Stephen, starts with a W. Sorry, I'm going to drop that last name. And so I'm reading a chapter in there. It's on a black denomination, a black Pentecostal denomination called the Church of God in Christ. And as I'm reading that chapter, I see a sentence, one sentence, where this FBI agent is convinced that this black Pentecostal denomination, I mean, you can't get much lower than that, and they're also in the South. He says that they are not as dangerous as the Seventh-day Adventists. And I read that and I'm just like, whoa, what are you saying here? And I looked up his source, and he had it there, and it's from a group of files called the Old German Files, and they are declassified now. And thankfully, they were not redacted, so none of the information is blotted out with black ink or whatever. And so those are online if you have a subscription. And I went online and I started searching, and the searching is really, really bad because these things were originally typed on old typewriters. And so you search for the word Adventist, and you only get like 32 hits. But I started filling in like all of the sorts of Adventist words, and I brought this up to over 2,500 pages of declassified FBI files on Seventh-day Adventists and well over 100 different case files. And I know that there are many, many, many more that it's going to be incredibly hard to find. We will never know the full extent of it, because you look in Adventist archives and you see over and over and over and over again that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was convinced that our colporteurs and ministers were German spies.
Wow.
And so I started analyzing these documents that I found and realized that they are infiltrating our camp meetings secretly, our church services. They are confiscating our mail, intercepting our telegrams. They are holding missionaries who have been overseas and come back. They're holding them in jail for a period of time to investigate their cases. They do jail several of our colporteurs. They throw some of our Adventists who were conscientious objectors into an insane asylum. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And so they're doing this to us, and it comes to the point where they say, hey, we don't like what you're publishing. We believe you guys are socialists. Everything you're publishing is red. And so they said, basically, you need to change, or you need to go to prison for a long time. And this was no idle threat. The group that we now call Jehovah's Witnesses, they existed at that time under a different name, okay? And people throughout America regularly confused Seventh-day Adventists with the International Bible Student Association, what we now call Jehovah's Witnesses. And the federal government goes to them, goes to their top leaders, they arrest them for the same reasons that they're going to come hunting for us, and they prosecute them, and they sentence their top leaders to 80 years in prison to serve 4 consecutive terms of 20 years. So really, effectively, only 20 years in prison. But that's a long time. 4 days later, they come knocking at our door, and they say, look, are you in or out? Are you going to change what you published, or are you going to or go to prison? And Adventists decided to change. And so here's the really tough thing. This is major stuff for Adventist history. I found it a couple of years ago. I have written 2 or 3 different scholarly papers on the subject that I've presented and read in a boring scholarly kind of convention that nerds like Ben and I love to attend, and that's basically all. Okay, so I've done that. So I've done some preliminary analysis and work on this. However, I haven't published it yet because it takes a lot of time. And you've got to do lots of other work to help contextualize and do lots of other things to get something like that published. But for those of you who want to know more about it right now, if you go to the Adventist Peace Fellowship website, I don't know exactly what the website is named, but you Google Adventist Peace Fellowship, you'll find it. And they have a podcast called Adventist Peace Radio. And so one of those papers that I have presented, I have recorded for them, and they've put it on a podcast, and you can get that information. So there really isn't a source, like a book or an article that I can give you. It doesn't exist. I haven't written it. No one else has written it. It's one of those things. There's many things like this in our history simply that we have forgotten and don't know. But there is a way to sort of get the information. And so go to that podcast and then check that out.
Kevin,
yes.
What did they change? Specifically speaking.
Yes, I need to repeat that part of it for people who weren't here in the morning. So among the things that they changed, and they changed several things, like they go through and they cut out a lot of like condemnatory language that sounds unpatriotic. So anything that sounds anti-100% American, they're changing all of this kind of stuff. Anything that's critical of the United States of America. And Adventists were very critical of the United States. And one of the most ways that they were was this so-called doctrine of the two-horned beast, what they called the two-horned beast at that time, and most people know now as the lamb-like beast. And there are reasons you know it as the lamb-like beast, not the two-horned beast, and I'll get into that in a second. Make sure I don't drop it this time. I didn't mention this in Sabbath school. Okay, and so what we're doing is we're saying that America is this beast because it claims to protect religious liberty and civil liberty or social liberty. And so it looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon because it denies religious liberty and civil liberty to religious and racial minorities. And so we're preaching this, we're teaching it, we're holding up pictures before people. And let me show you one, okay? Let me just show you what I'll have to take you to the door of my office, okay?
Let's go.
Does this show up? You see that two-horned beast there?
Yeah.
It's depicted. It's depicted as a lion with a lion head, a leopard's body, and the feet of a bear. Okay, and if anyone is a really good student of prophecy, they're going to say, "Hey, wait a second. That's how the beast from the sea in the first part of Revelation 13. That's how that beast is supposed to look."
Yeah.
You are indeed correct. Seventh-day Adventists are depicting the two-horned beast, the second beast that comes out of the earth in that chapter, because they believe that that beast is made in the image of the first beast. And who do Adventists say the first beast is?
Papacy.
That's right. And so they're claiming that Protestant America has become just as oppressive as the papacy was during the Middle Ages. Okay? And that's why they're depicting this beast as a lion, leopard, bear combination. Okay, and so they are going to change all of this in World War I because the American government does not like being identified with this nasty beast. That seems so unpatriotic and so unacceptable. And as I mentioned before, this was this is a time where First Amendment rights had never been tested and proven in courts, and so the government rode roughshod over all of the First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. They coalesce very clearly in this moment for Adventist history. And so Adventists changed this. And so what they were doing before is they're saying America is this beast now. They're preaching this so thoroughly in the 19th century. America is currently this beast. It's oppressing people now. And starting in World War I, you see more and more frequently, and you see clearly in a book called Bible Readings from the Home Circle, where they say, no, America is not the two-horned beast now, but it will become so in the future when it passes a national Sunday law. Okay? And they also say it's not really America that will become the two-horned beast. It's just liberal Protestantism that's going to somehow take over the government and then become make America this two-horned beast. And so they shift things there. They shift the emphasis and focus. And what I didn't share in Sabbath school is that they shift in their depictions of the beast at the same time. So whereas we're depicting it before as a leopard, lion, bear combination, gnarly looking thing, sometimes explicitly stating this is about creeds and slavery, all this kind of stuff, America's oppressing, we start to depict it as a benign buffalo. A cute little buffalo with two horns. Around the same time that the buffalo nickel comes out, for those of you who are aware of that, coin collecting and all of that. So America and the buffalo are becoming symbolic. Apparently they've forgotten everything they've done to the buffalo and Native Americans, and they're trying to maybe overcome their past. So buffaloes are in around World War I. And Adventists start depicting this beast as not just an angry buffalo, but a cute buffalo. It looks nice. It looks like something you'd want to go visit at the zoo. And then shortly after that, around World War II, they shifted again, and then they just start depicting the thing as the cute little lamb. And at least they made it a little bit more biblically accurate this time, but nevertheless, they're not even putting a dragon forked tongue in that thing. They're not even saying that it speaks like a dragon. So they're domesticating. We domesticated our understanding of prophecy, not just in how we're saying it, but how we're also depicting it visually. And this is changing in World War I. And I'm not the first person to discover this. I'm connecting it with FBI surveillance of Adventism. And it wasn't just the FBI. There were other state institutions, the military, and other things that were also surveilling Adventism. And it was a very oppressive period of our history. I'm connecting that in there. But the first person to bring that up was Ronald Graybill. He wrote it in an article published in Insight magazine, which I believe is now defunct and has been defunct for a while. And then Douglas Morgan points that out too in his book, Adventism in the American Republic, which was published in 2001. And if you read Doug's book, Doug very briefly and like part of a paragraph mentions that at the 1919 Bible Conference, Seventh-day Adventist administrators were having to explain to pastors why had they changed Bible readings for the home circle? And so they explained to the ministers there that the Department of Justice, who oversaw the FBI, that they had come and said that they had to change things. So they actually admitted it, but only to a couple of dozen ministers that were there. I mean, most people never knew this. You look at other Adventist tracts, and they will say, in books, they'll say that this past the chief military censor on a certain day. So they actually owned up to the fact that they revised their stuff.
Yeah.
They never did that for Bible readings for the home circle.
Yeah.
They never did it when it came to changing our actual doctrine, part of our fundamental beliefs, part of the three angels' message.
So
they didn't accept that. They didn't
so-
own up to that.
So what happens from that point forward is we're hearing less and less about this beast currently speaking like a dragon. Its future, that
Yep.
provides the platform for an increase in patriotism.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Man. Oh, man. And it happened. Oh, it happened. Take a look at our history. You're going to find hardly any books on Seventh-day Adventist involvement in the Civil War, even though there were soldiers there, or World War I. Next to nothing is written on that. You go to World War II, huge explosion. We're writing book after book after book saying how awesomely patriotic Adventists were. Whereas our non-combatant stance that we took officially as a church had been a reluctant thing that you did only if you were drafted because you didn't want to take a bullet and become a martyr for your pacifism. That was a reluctant stopgap measure. By the time of World War II, we have made non-combatancy the way that we are patriotic. And we hold up Desmond Doss as this amazing, awesome hero in the church. And I'm not denying that what he did was amazing. I don't want to bash his legacy.
Right.
But what I'm saying is it's emblematic of a shift where Adventists in America are no longer looking at America as an oppressive beast because of what it does to religious and ethnic and racial minorities. They're upholding it with such firm patriotism. So much so that shortly after, and this is something most people may not know either, shortly after World War II, the Army and the federal government is so impressed, by and large, through people like Desmond Doss. He became a huge national hero, the first Adventist and first conscientious objector to get the Medal of Honor, highest medal that you can achieve. Because of this publicity, they come knocking at our door and say, hey, now there's this thing called the Cold War going on, and biological and chemical warfare is a big problem. We're really worried about Russia dropping some sort of chemical bomb on America and hurting us. And so they said, how about this? How about we give you Sabbath privileges and non-combatant roles, and you come in and you serve as what we call white coats for a project we call Operation White Coat. So what we'll do to you, we'll tell you what we're going to do first, but we're going to inject biological chemicals into your body, see how you react, so that we can try to find an antidote for it. And so they made Adventists in almost all of the white coats, like over 3,000 of them, almost all of them were Adventists.
Wow.
And so they pump them with these chemicals and stuff, or give them something to breathe, like the West Nile fly virus or whatever. And then they try to see how they'll behave, how they'll react, and then they try to come up with a vaccine. So they made Adventists human test subjects. And Adventists were very proud to do this. And I'm not trying to say they were wrong or whatever. I'm just saying this is what happens. And so it was a way to be patriotic, to support our nation. And yeah, there's some good that happened. A lot of the vaccines we have for major things like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, typhoid, several things, it come from this, guys.
Yeah.
Adventists were also responsible for putting us on the moon, because they were not going to send astronauts to space unless they knew that they could navigate that space shuttle under the absolute worst conditions possible. So they trained Adventists how to operate a space shuttle. They went through the flight simulator and they pumped them full with all these horrible diseases, so much so that like the panel lights underneath the buttons in the space shuttle burned their eyes, like it was blinding their eyes.
Wow. But
But nevertheless, Adventists were able to navigate that thing in simulation mode back to Earth, that they said, okay, we'll send our astronauts now to space. And so they do.
Wow.
And bringing this back to black people, by the way, Ben can tell you about the Adventist inventor who worked for NASA who was black. What's his name, Ben? I'm dropping it right now. Shoot. Oh, well, that's an aside, but he was an awesome guy. But speaking of racism in America, he invented so many things, like the tires that they use on the loon rovers. He invented a toilet that could be used in weightless conditions, and he never got patent rights for these things.
Wow.
Everyone else for NASA is patenting things, and he never got credit for any of the inventions he made until historians later found out, oh my word, Robert Cherney, right? Yeah, Robert Cherney.
Wow.
Oh wow, he invented it. That was an aside, but
Yeah.
If I can just say something real quickly, Kevin, that with this rise of Adventist patriotism that you very eloquently just spoke on, this was why, well, one of the reasons why Adventists didn't want to be associated with the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow.
Definitely.
Colin
Fear of communism. Right?
Colin Kaepernick was, when he was kneeling, he was seen as anti-patriotic, as not being. Of course, this was debunked because people were pointing out that patriotism and protest is quintessentially American and quintessentially patriotic. So that's been debunked. But Adventists were distancing themselves from the civil rights movement because some believed that the sort of protest that they were doing, Martin Luther King and others, that it was not American enough.
The peaceful protests.
Yes, Adventists were still trying to prove their patriotism to the American government, while also trying to prove their Christianity to evangelicals. So we were just doing a lot of proving during that time. But you still see it now that there's this stigma against the racial protest, the anti-racism protests, because it's perceived as not being American enough.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so the Adventists, because of this real patriotic jag that they were going on, since World War I and before, they wanted to distance themselves from the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah. Speaking of the FBI and religion, Ben, to piggyback off of you, piggyback off of me. Speaking of the FBI and religion, most people do not realize that Martin Luther King was put on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list.
Yeah, I did know that.
And they did that because they were convinced that he and everyone else in the civil rights movement were communists. And of course, this is during the Red Scare, the Cold War. And so to be quote unquote red was the most un-American thing you could possibly be. And this was entire poppycock, okay? But nevertheless, some of these people had attended at one point in time, maybe a socialist meeting or a communist meeting. And so just for the very fact that they were there and maybe got a picture taken there, they're like, oh, they're all red. And so the FBI put MLK on the top 10 most wanted list. And it gets even worse. So another thing that bothers me now is that so many Adventists, white Americans generally, are throwing down stuff like, what, MLK? Yeah, but why hold him up like such a great guy when he was, having all of these affairs?
Right, and that's what they kind of taught. I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but that's what we were made to believe. Why, the FBI was trying to find things on him.
Yeah.
So
you want to know why we know that? You want to know why we know that information about MLK? It's not illegal in the 20th century to be having an affair.
Right.
The FBI had no legal right to be wiretapping his hotel room when he's doing this. And I'm not excusing the fact that he had affairs.
Right, right.
They knew that. They had no legal right for this. But you know what? They leaked the wiretapped recordings. And you know why they leaked the wiretapped recordings? Because Martin Luther King Jr. had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and white Americans did not want him to receive it. And so they mailed a copy of that to his wife, and then they leaked it to the press. Because they did not want him to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I'm grateful that King got it anyways. But nevertheless, that's why we even know that. And it wasn't an illegal thing. I'm not excusing it.
Yeah.
But just for the fact that he made mistakes, that doesn't mean he didn't do some really, really importantly awesome and wonderful things. And so I hope that people understand that kind of history, because it does put a different light on the way that King was treated.
Right.
He was incredibly, incredibly abused by the federal government, by white Americans, North and South. I mean, it's just amazing. And he's not alone. Not alone.
Right.
So basically, when we began to care more about what other people think, so we're trying to please America. Hey, look, we're trying to please the evangelicals. Hey, look, we forgot about our message and basically created a vacuum that now when the message is preached, when the message is lived, it seems so like is this new? Is this new theology? Is this the movement going off the rails? We're supposed to be preaching the three angels' messages. What in the world is going on? Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Yeah, and this is why most people, almost everybody, including some of our Adventist historians, this is entirely new information for them. They didn't know about the extent of the abolitionism before the Civil War. They didn't know that we were targeted by the FBI. They didn't know any of that kind of stuff. And you start to put all of these things together. I mean, there's so much that was known, but nevertheless, this is new to most people because we've always assumed, just like religions tend to do, that religions don't change. We've always been true to our heritage, always been true to our past. We've always been preaching the same message, same three angels message. We have not, folks. We have not. Before the Civil War, you could not preach the three angels message and not condemn slavery and the injustice we treated to blacks.
Wow.
You couldn't. And no one did. There's not a single shred of evidence that they ever divorced it. I mean, you can look at Adventist sources. You can also look at non-Adventist sources in newspapers where Americans are hearing this information coming from that, and they don't like it. They don't like it. And so they attack Adventists in the press before the Civil War. It did happen. And it was so virulent that, this is another important point that I haven't shared yet. When Adventists are doing this, talking about politics, we tend to distinguish between preaching and teaching religion and politics. They're not always seen as separate things. And really, it's really hard to divorce them, because when Adventists are doing this, it becomes illegal in the South for Adventists to mail their literature down there. Now, why is that so?
Wow.
After Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 and a few other things go down in the South, it becomes illegal to send abolitionist material through the post office.
Wow.
And what happens in the late 1850s is that Seventh-day Adventists were saying so much against slavery that the Southern post offices are not just withholding and saying, this is illegal, they're throwing all of our mail away, and James White says it was impossible to send any of our literature to the South. We actually had a few ministers that went to some of the border states like Missouri and Kentucky, and they were threatened with imprisonment and like $3,000 fine. And $3,000 in 1859, folks, that is a lot of money. That's probably well over a year's wages, okay? And so they're threatening our ministers in every kind of way because of the fact that they recognize we are abolitionists. And so that's a political thing, guys. Preaching and teaching the word, people can, and the state has, over again in our past history, they have seen our preaching as political.
Wow.
And so we don't need to debate whatever they're not. I don't care what you call it. Like Ben said, call it a tomato, okay?
But you know, it's what I'm just like, oh wow. Like, this is Satan's way to water down our message.
Yes.
So the more, oh, that's political, you stop saying that, because, man, that is just...
It creates a mask.
Yeah.
It creates a mask. Just like there's all these arguments about, like the colorblind racist. I don't see color. A lot of white people say, I don't see color. I'm not racist. I don't see color. That is a mask for their racism. What you're saying in those statements is that black people aren't beautiful, that looking at their blackness is somehow a thing that you should ignore, and that you can't accept it. I mean, there is so much, and we always this is Satan's work. It is Satan's work. We create some sort of label, and we say, oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. And it's just a mask for our racism, a mask for the devil's own agenda. You're right when you say that. Absolutely, Pastor Myers. I think you're dead on when you say that.
We talked about this too before, that I think just understanding what you've just shared, and I think when we look at America as turning into the dragon in the future, and it kind of takes away when I say excitement, I just mean like for Adventists to be right now, they're just so married to nationalism or America, or kind of putting that above the Bible and religion. So I've always told them, I was like, it's going to be very difficult to pull away from that and now say this thing that I loved so much and defended so much will be very difficult to turn against it and say, okay, now you're the dragon.
Let me just jump in here real quick, because I think we rob our message of power when we water it down. Like, when people hear, I mean, just think about how many people, and this is not a beat up America thing, but when you're able to show, the typical person out there on the street, hey, listen, all this stuff is going on right now? It's in the Bible. Look at Revelation 13, verse 11 onward. What other nation do you know that has the appearance of a lamb, but is speaking like a dragon? And I mentioned this a few weeks ago. There are many of our black men who are leaving Adventism to join pro-black movements, Hebrew Israelites. This is happening a lot in places like England, in major cities. And the reason is because young black men are like, what does this church have for me? They don't care about my plight. They are not addressing, and I'm not saying it across the board, but this is the message. I mean, think about that. That could not have been possible in the 1860s. And no, black people knew, because of what Adventists stood for back then, they were like, oh yeah, this is home for us. You know, unfortunately, they would come into the church and start being treated a certain way by white Adventists. Not all of them, but, whatever percentage or whatever. But the point is that we had a message that could draw the oppressed. The message that we had, that a lot of people are pushing right now, is very simply, hey, just focus on salvation. Jesus will fix everything. And, we'll be good to go. We don't have to address these issues. Just preach the gospel.
And I have a real quick, even despite that, now, in fact, you had an interesting dynamic in from time immemorial in Adventist history. The black leaders, the black ministers, I'm thinking particularly of ministers like William Hawkins Green and G.E. Peters. In the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, they are hiding the discrimination that's going on in the church from the average member, from the average black member, because they know that if the average member knew, that it may shake their faith.
Yeah.
So they wanted them to keep their eyes on Jesus, keep their eyes on the truth, on the message, as opposed to how they were treated.
Yes.
And so, when we talk about regional conferences and how I said that Jim Crow has been perpetuated in Adventism, in a way it has been to blacks' advantage, because many people, when they're treated despicably in a racist way, as they were out in the world they see separate bathrooms, they see separate water fountains, they can't eat at certain restaurants, and then they go in the church. And it's the same thing. They say we can't have the truth.
Yeah.
Right.
When we're being treated like this.
Right.
When churches became segregated, the average black member was not experiencing white racism.
At least in the church.
At least in the church. Right.
Yeah, in the church. And so one of the things that Lucy Byard did when she was rejected or denied treatment at Washington Adventist Sanitarium.
Tell that story very quickly, please.
Get it right. No, I'm just kidding. You set the record straight, Ben.
I'm still making a main point.
Yeah.
Though, despite all of this, Adventism is now majority black. Of the 22 million Adventists around the world, there are 9 million in sub-Saharan Africa, and then you have the blacks in North America, which is about, help me out, 300,000, 350,000 blacks throughout the Caribbean and Central America, blacks in the diaspora in South America. I would say blacks are about 50% of the global Adventist church.
Yes, I think
Now,
that's right.
So despite, come on, can you please preach this for me?
Next week.
Because of, it's still drawing blacks to the message.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Can you just share that story of, and I'm forgetting the name right now, but this
Lucy Byard.
Lucy Byard.
Yes.
Yes, she was a saintly woman who resided in New York City. And she really helped. We've uncovered some aspects of her life that we didn't know. She really helped pioneer Adventism in New York City because she converted in the early 1900s, and she was a Bible worker and a gospel worker in New York City during that time, where there were almost no black Adventists at all. by all accounts, she was a wonderful woman, and I'm talking about her humanity because often she's become just a symbol, just an icon, just a catalyst. But she was actually a warm and wonderful human being, a warm and wonderful Adventist. She was an organist at her church in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, for the longest. She was known to cook some mean vegetarian food. And just a sweet lady. Anyhow, she developed liver cancer. And from that, something called cachexia, which is wasting away, because of, issues related to her liver cancer. And she wanted to go to an Adventist hospital to be treated. Because she was a deeply Adventist woman. This is in, 1943. So she'd been an Adventist for over 40 years. And she loved the cause. She loved Adventist people. And she really subscribed to the Adventist health message. And at the time, Adventist hospitals held to a holistic view of health, as first propounded by, really instituted by John Harvey Kellogg at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. A holistic view. So it's not just, we're going to throw a lot of medications or treatments at your condition. There's going to be a holistic treatment. And so the sanitarium in Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C., right there, on the line next to the General Conference and the Review and Herald Publishing Association in the early 1940s, they still did that holistic treatment for their patients. And so there was a heavy social aspect to the treatment, because you guys know New Start, or it's called Creation Now, nutrition, fresh air, all this stuff. But one of the aspects was a social aspect. And so this becomes important because at one time, the sanitarium did admit Black patients on sort of like a subpar basis, where you could be admitted, but you would be in the basement.
Mercy.
You wouldn't be able to fraternize with the other patients out on the lawn during the summer and the spring and the autumn. So you could be admitted, but it was on a subpar basis because they said we have to cater to our clientele, and some of them were from the South. So they said we can't have racial mixing at the Washington Sanitarium. And so Lucy Byard didn't know all this. She just had liver cancer, and she wanted to be treated. So to make a long story short, a minister in New York City, his name was Jeter Cox, and he had previously been the director of the colored department for the Columbia Union, where the Washington Adventist Sanitarium was found. And at the time, they had admitted Blacks to the sanitarium, but Jeter Cox didn't know that had changed.
You said they had to. They were supposed to admit Blacks. Is that what you said?
They had admitted Blacks previously.
Oh, they had. Okay.
Sort of like on a one-off subpar basis. We'll admit you go to this side of you go to this wing, or you go to the basement of the sanitarium. But Jeter Cox didn't know that they had a board action to stop admitting Blacks. And so Jeter Cox was in dialogue. He was writing letters to the sanitarium, to the registrar, or what have you. And so they were going to admit Lucy Byard, and they didn't know that she was Black. And so she and her husband took the train down. This is during World War II. So because gas prices were prohibitive, Jeter Cox was going to drive them down, but they ended up taking the train from New York City to Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C. And they arrived at the sanitarium. This is September of 1943. It was still hot in Maryland. So, she didn't die of the flu or anything like that. She didn't catch a cold. It was still hot, end of summer, kind of beginning of early fall. And to make a long story short, she and her husband, James, Lucy Byard and her husband, James Byard, when they came to check into the Washington Adventist Sanitarium, this is when the stories start to diverge. James Byard said that it was made clear to them that they were not admitted, they were not welcome there.
Wow.
Whereas the Robert Hare, the medical director for the sanitarium, and another man named P.L. Baker, he said that they did say that Lucy Byard could be admitted, but that she would have to, stay out of sight in a certain part of the wing because of Maryland laws. They put it on Maryland laws.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, Adventists have been doing this. They've been attributing their racism to something else. It's not us. It's the laws. It's the hospital policies of the state of Maryland. Mm-hmm. Whatever happened, James and Lucy Byard got the point. Washington Adventist Sanitarium did not want them there as Black people. Mm-hmm. And they were not confused by Lucy Byard's color. There's a lot of lore has grown up with the story. Mm-hmm. That she was really light-skinned, and so they didn't really know if she was Black or not. And no, they knew she was Black from the very start. Mm-hmm. They didn't know she was Black during the negotiations.
Right.
Okay.
For her to be admitted,
yeah.
But they knew she was Black when she showed up. The woman is Black. Look at pictures of her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so it was very clear to Lucy and her husband James that they did not want her as a patient. And so they said, the man P.L. Baker, he said, we'll even pay for your taxi cab to Freedman's Hospital, which is Howard University Hospital now, mm-hmm. across town in D.C. And so, this sick Adventist lady, all she wanted was to go to an Adventist sanitarium.
Wow.
And be treated for liver cancer. This sick lady was denied entrance to an Adventist sanitarium. She's a pioneer of Adventism. Shoot, she's a human being.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she was essentially refused treatment at the Washington Adventist Hospital. And so she went to the Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. And in fact, there was a Black intern there named J. Mark Cox. And he becomes a big figure in Black Adventism. And she got good treatment there. Now, the lore that has grown up with the story says that she died from pneumonia on the way to Freedman's Hospital.
Mm.
That's what I was told. That's what I always believed.
She did die in a way.
Okay.
Because her heart was broken. And James Byard makes this clear in a letter he wrote to G.E. Peters, that she was just devastated, that her health had improved because the time the negotiations were made when she was in New York City to the time in which she actually went to the hospital, James Byard said that her health had improved upon the anticipation that she would be in good Adventist care and with Adventists. I mean, we know that that there's a mental connection to disease and illness in your body. Mm-hmm. But he says that she regressed and her health took a turn for the worse when she was rejected at the Washington Adventist Sanitarium. Mm. And so at Freedman's Hospital, she actually got good care because she was in the hands of a Black Adventist, and she lived a month longer. Okay, after she was rejected at the Washington Adventist Sanitarium. But she died from liver cancer from cachexia, which is wasting away. Mm-hmm. And it's a very, I think, an apt cause of death, appropriate cause of death, because she had been neglected by Adventists. Mm. She had wasted away. And her being turned away was actually the catalyst that that gave birth to many grassroots movements, among them, which is called the Committee of 43, which we have some Black Adventists, probably one of the most effective grassroots movements in Adventism. And they protested that she was turned away, even before she died. Mm. They were protesting that she was turned away. And they were essentially saying, she's a human being made in the image of God. She's a Black Adventist in good and regular standing. And we are paying tithes and offerings that fund the Washington Adventist Sanitarium. Mm. And we can't get treatment in the sanitarium. Mm. And they expanded it. They said, we fund Adventist schools, and we can't be admitted into Adventist schools. We fund Adventist administration, and we can't eat in the GC cafeteria. The GC cafeteria was segregated. Or excuse me, Blacks couldn't eat in the GC cafeteria. They had to eat in the basement, a floor up in another room. So they said, we're paying all of these tithes and offerings. We support the church in every way we can. but we are still being turned away from Adventist institutions because of the color of our skin.
Wow.
And it was the Lucy Byers situation that was the real catalyst for regional conferences. And like George Floyd and police brutality in the United States, they're saying we're literally being murdered because of racism. We're dying because of racism. It's the same song, it's just a different album. Okay? The dynamic has not changed. We're dying because of racism. And so it would be best for us to separate. Only because of that. Because, I mean, we can't get schools, I mean, we can't be admitted to Adventist schools. We can't start our own because our tithes are going to white enterprises. You know, so I mean, we need our own conferences that will speak to our own needs and treat us like human beings. Even up to that point, Blacks were divided on regional conferences. We believe in the harmony of the three angels' messages. We believe in the harmony of the truth, that we are all one, you know, John 17. We are all one in Christ. So we cannot have this. But the white leaders said, you won't be able to get parity, you won't be able to get equity in Adventism as is, unless you break off and do your own thing. I mean, you know, unless you have your own churches, schools, conferences, Adventist hospitals. So you see Riverside Sanitarium, you know, Adventists have their own hospital. You see, excuse me, Black Adventists. You see Black Adventists having their own element, you know, Pine Forge Academy, of course, Oakwood and others. So you see the rise of Black Adventist institutions because they literally could not be seen. They could not be admitted. They would not be admitted into white Adventist institutions.
So it was institutional.
It was systemic. I would say that the birth of Adventism was sort of like the birth of the United States. Pretty soon, systemic racism was grafted into the warp and woof of the system, of the structure. And it literally became policy that you will either not admit, let's say a college, you will either not admit Blacks to this college, or there's a quota. Not a quota. What's the opposite of a quota? You can only admit this much, a limit. Yeah, so you can only have 2 or 3 so that we won't end up being overwhelmed by the Negroes.
Right. Mercy.
Apostate Protestantism is a failure to protest. It's giving up the protest. And we often talk about apostate Protestantism and we point the finger. Yeah, you know, that's apostate Protestantism. But we can actually exercise that principle individually in the church, where we refuse to protest. We say we're not going to open our mouth, we're not going to speak. And it doesn't have to be to just this issue. It can be to, you know, there are a lot of issues. This is a huge one in America, but there are a lot of issues. When we cease to protest, we're following suit of that lamb-like beast that speaks like a dragon.
Worshiping it.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what the scriptures say it's going to force people to do.
Yeah. And that's why there will be a shaking in Adventism.
I believe that.
That's why there will be a shaking in Adventism.
I believe that. You know, it's 1:15. We started at 10 o'clock, but this has been so informative. I hope you guys go back and look at all the comments, and because people were just blown away by the information. They want more. I want to give Benjamin's website that he operates, blacksdahistory.org. So Benjamin, is that where they can follow up on some of the information that you expressed? A lot of that whole compilation, that 1,500 pages.
Blacksdahistory.org, and there's also a blacksdahistory.org YouTube channel. There is Google Adventist Archives, which is the General Conference Archives. They have a wealth of material there.
Okay.
Google Adventist Digital Library, which is an initiative of Andrews University North American Division and the General Conference. Adventist Digital Library, the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists, is coming out July 1.
Okay.
So look out for that. Look up Andrews University Digital Commons.
Okay.
You can get all sorts of dissertations and thesis on Seventh-day Adventism. Look up Oakwood University Archives, Loma Linda University Archives. There is now a wealth of Adventist materials and sources out there, free books, periodicals. You can do this stuff yourself. You can read original sources. All of it's out there.
So we have to start reading, guys. I mean, more than what we've been reading, but it's there. So I'm glad that it's so accessible for.
We'll
for
put
those.
some of those links. We'll put some of those
Yeah.
sources in the description of this video.
And a
when-
lot of
when it's
people
done.
were asking, is this going to be saved? And so, of course, this is a Facebook Live and on YouTube. So it's going to be on Power of the Lamb, Ivor Meyer's channel on YouTube. So you can go back and watch it. For those of you who missed the beginning from Sabbath School, you can definitely go back and watch it.
Yeah.
And then Kevin,
I just will say very quickly that Benjamin and Kevin will be starting a podcast. Now that's prophecy on my part. They haven't talked about this at
I
all.
was thinking like, wow,
But,
really? That's awesome.
Oh man, I mean, just the amount of information and knowledge between you guys is
You
just.
guys should. Honestly, you should.
It's.
hope
I
you
could
do.
have just been quiet and just listened the whole time. It's good stuff, guys.
No, you couldn't, Ivor. No, you couldn't.
Well, I just want to, Kevin, I just want you to be able to share if there's any place that people want to, I don't know if you have a website, or I don't know what you have going on. Is there anything where, or if people want to get in contact with you, because people are asking all kinds of things on here.
Yeah, that's good. I am writing my dissertation now, which is where all of this stuff is going to be, and then I will publish it as a book.
Okay.
I have written and published 3 articles on the subject of abolition and Seventh-day Adventism. If you Google, for example, my name, Kevin Burton, and Joseph Bates, one of the first things that will pop up, if not the first thing, is going to be the article I wrote explaining Joseph Bates' activities as an abolitionist, where I point out actually what he does. Historians had never bothered to look and ask, hey, we know from Joseph Bates' autobiography that he was an abolitionist, but what did he do? No one actually ever thought to check that. And so I discovered that Joseph Bates was really, really radical, involving himself in campaigns to abolish Jim Crow laws in the North, which were segregating train cars, to abolish the interracial marriage law that said white and black people couldn't get married. Joseph Bates is not only involved, he's actually circulating petitions. He actually helps the state of Massachusetts abolish those laws in 1843. So I put that stuff in there, but there's 2 forms of that article. The first one was published in print. It's shorter, less interesting. The other one came out on March 3, 2020 this year. It's online too. That one has more detail. It's 4 times as long. Okay. The second article came out April 2019 or something like that. It's on a second Black Adventist minister that we had in the 1850s and 60s that we had forgotten about, a former slave named John West. And so if you, and he was an abolitionist as well, if you want to look up that article, Google my name and Google probably John West or John the Domine West, because he was known and revered as the Domine, which is a Latin term for minister. And that guy was not only a former slave. The guy, when you know his story, man, he had kyphosis, and I can't avoid saying the unpolitically correct term. He was a hunchback, okay, and a former slave. And this guy is preaching, and he's just, his story moves my soul. And it's not just me, because a painter who had no idea that he was a Seventh-day Adventist painted a painting of abolitionists in Peterborough, New York. It's
Show him the painting behind you.
Oh yeah, it's on my wall. Okay, yeah, that's true. Okay, so here is the painting right there. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so right here,
Yeah.
can you see that?
Yeah.
That's Domine West, Seventh-day Adventist minister.
Wow.
And he's depicted in that painting, and he's depicted in the very, very front, because the artist, knowing nothing about his faith, was so impressed with him that he has the whole painting story, the story that inspired the painting, revolving around him. So Domine West is calling you, come join the abolitionists. And Domine dominates the narrative of that story, because he is He's a minister, and so he's calling you to come in. Several speakers speak there on that day. Dominique starts the whole day by calling you in there, offering prayer, and then he speaks and preaches the last sermon. Now, this is all fiction, but this is what's going on in the artist's mind when he painted this painting a few years ago.
Wow.
He had no idea he was a Seventh-day Adventist minister.
Yeah.
Wow.
He just found him so touching and so inspiring. And so I wrote an article on him, published in the Adventist Review as well. So you can Google that, my name,
So when
Kevin
you Google
Burton.
your name, all these come
Google,
up.
I think, I mean, they do for me. I don't, maybe that's
Yeah.
because I'm narcissistic. No, I don't think so. I think that's just because if you Google my name and you Google the name of John West, it'll pop up.
Okay.
And then I also had one that was published yesterday for Juneteenth.
Okay.
In the North American Division newsletter. And I tried to give a very, very, very broad overview of some of the things that Seventh-day Adventists did in their activism. And I give some glosses there in the introductory paragraph. Then I have a paragraph on Black Seventh-day Adventists and their abolitionism. And so I talk about Dominique West a little bit again.
Yeah.
I also mention a couple of other Black Adventists in a town called Bath, New York, Elias and Henrietta Platt, who were very close friends with Frederick Douglass. And I mentioned them and a little bit about, I mean, this is so glossed. There's so much more to say about all of this.
Yeah.
But they're there. Then I have a paragraph about Seventh-day Adventist petitioners. And I mentioned some of that. I go beyond Joseph Bates a little bit there. And then I have a final paragraph in very cursory form showing how, trying to explain in just like sentences, how Seventh-day Adventists incorporated anti-racism into the Three Angels' messages. And so that, I don't even remember. I wrote that, like, they asked me a couple days ago to write it. I had to write it in a fury, and I don't even remember what I called it.
Yeah.
I don't know the title of it. But it's in the NAD newsletter.
Okay.
What's it called? Ministerial, I don't know. But if you Google that, I mean, a lot of people have been sharing that around today on Facebook. So
Yeah,
hopefully
people
that
have already started Googling your name as you've been talking. So they're on it. They're definitely on it.
Yeah.
And then you can find the podcast that has the stuff about FBI surveillance of Adventism as well,
Right.
if you Google that.
But before we close,
Okay.
I'm just going to say this very quickly. This kind of sum everything up. Of all the people that have something to say in what's going on right now, of all the people, of all the people, that's all I'm going to say. Why are we not, with our history, why are we not on the forefront of this issue that the whole world,
Literally.
the whole world is focused on right now? What sense does that make?
To be silent.
It makes none to me. And the fact that we were so closely tied with the abolitionist movement in the message that I preached a few weeks back, the hidden agenda behind racism, I'm talking about this very thing. God is calling for end-time abolitionists to help deliver these slaves off Satan's plantation. And when I say slaves, I mean people who are still slaves to racism. That was the whole point of that message. There are people who are slaves to this way of thinking. They're slaves to the Jim Crow mentality. And God has raised up an end-time movement to be abolitionists, to help set captives free. And, you know, what an opportunity for us to finish off the way we started. And I just pray that those listening today and those that will watch us in the future will just see and kind of reframe,
Yes.
you know.
You have to put a new lens.
Yeah,
Take the old lens
just
out.
take those lenses off that have been put on you by outside forces and start seeing the gospel for what it is, the three angels' messages for what it is. So I'm done.
Yeah, we're done. This is what I want to ask because we had quite probably the most we've ever had on Facebook. I don't know how many were on YouTube. It's usually more on YouTube, and so I'm just, because there's so much history here, we're just asking that you just share and share away, share with as many people as you can. It is a little long, so tell them if they have like a 3-hour drive or something to listen. But it was good. It didn't feel like that. Our numbers did not drop. They kept growing and growing and growing. I was like, well, they're not bored, so that's good. So why don't we close in prayer?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you guys to stay on a little bit afterward because we still have some more talking to do. Just a little bit, just a little bit.
You guys are hungry. You don't have to. That's him. But okay.
Anyway, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Just thank you for the wealth of information we've received today, Lord. Lord, help us to be about your business. Forgive us, Lord, where we have strayed from your message, strayed from your calling. And help us, Lord, again, help us to be about your business. We thank you, Lord, for speaking to us. Remind us that we are the light of the world. And we thank you again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Happy Sabbath. Thanks.
Happy Sabbath, guys. God bless you.
Bye-bye.